Okay, I think we are ready to start, friends. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are going to have a very interesting and important conversation today about our government's fortification policies and the turn that they're taking in making fortification mandatory of all of our staples like rice, milk, oil, salt, wheat. So before we start, we're going to do, I just want to make some housekeeping announcements. We do not have interpretation as of now, and I will request the speakers, if they are able to speak in English. We did have an interpreter who's not able to join us because of an emergency, which is very unfortunate. We have something like 10 speakers. One has canceled, so we have 9 speakers. We are going to be very strict on time because, as we know, we have many speakers. So every speaker will get a maximum of 10 minutes. At the 8-minute mark, I'm going to ring a bell. So you are aware that you have 2 minutes to wrap up. So please be mindful of that. In terms of the flow of the webinar, we have 3 main sessions today. Each session has 2 to 3 speakers. The first session is on public health impacts of fortification. The second session is on economic impacts, and the third and last one is on alternatives and holistic alternatives to malnutrition and to mandatory fortification. So each session will have 3 speakers, and then we are going to open it up to some burning questions. And that is because some of our speakers will not be able to stay till the very end. And then we will have a Q&A and discussion session at the end as well. So if your question is not too burning, please do hold on to them. Admins are going to be collating the questions. We have many volunteers who are helping here. I want to recognize them and thank them. We have Aditi, Naveen, Rohit, Ajay, Tanmay, Harsha, and many others who have helped with this webinar. So with that, let's start. I just want to give you a quick background as to why we are having this webinar today and a kind of a lay of the land. The reason we are doing this webinar, as I said, is because the government has made it very, very clear that it is now seeing fortification as the major kind of technological solution to vitamin and mineral deficiencies in India. There have been many existing programs at the state level, mostly at a voluntary nature, but now even on 15th of August, our Prime Minister made it very clear that they want to make fortification of rice mandatory, for instance. 2021 has seen a very big boost to this fortification policies, because since Jan, the FSSAI has issued draft regulations to fortify oil and milk with vitamin A and D. And also they have said that from 2024, rice, including the rice and all the PDS, is going to be mandatorily fortified with iron and folic acid. There have been centrally sponsored schemes, like a very large scheme going on around PDS rice fortification in 15 districts of this country, and fortified rice is being distributed through government nutrition programs like ICDS, midday meal, and Balwadi. So many have raised concerns. In fact, Asha, which is the organizer of this webinar, along with many allies, have been in a conversation with the FSSAI. There have been several letters which have been exchanged, and I encourage you to go to the website that we will post in the chat as well, website of Asha, and see the exchange of letters with the FSSAI and the main concerns that have been raised. Many questions exist. And the purpose of this webinar today is to do a deep dive into some of these concerns. And really the spirit here is one of education, one of learning about what the issues are, what the impacts are, what is the political economy issues, who is going to benefit most from fortification, who is going to be marginalized, does it work, what's the scientific evidence? So these and many other questions are going to be explored. So we have a fantastic lineup of 9 speakers with us. I'm going to start with our first speaker today, Dr. Veena Shatrugna, who's been the former Deputy Director of the National Institute of Nutrition in Hyderabad, and she's been engaged in nutrition policies in India for several decades now. Dr. Veena, welcome to the webinar. And we'd like you to Explain to us, Veena ji, what is fortification exactly? We have many lay people who have joined this webinar. We don't really understand how fortification works. How is it done? Is it different from supplementation? So could you give us a brief introduction to fortification? Also, is there any evidence that fortification works? What is the latest science telling us? Can it work on populations like India? So these are some questions we have for you, in addition to the other points that you would like to raise, Veena ji. So welcome. Veena ji?
Thank you, Asha, for inviting me, and apologies for the confusion that I may have created yesterday. Well, fortification is not a new technology. It has been there for years with us. In fact, in India, we have iodine fortified salt, which all of us consume. So it's not a new science that the corporates have discovered. What they've discovered is that anemia is a very useful peg on which they can hang all their programs, their cherished corporatization of almost every part of the food delivery system. But before I come to that, fortification is a technology that has been used by which you add a nutrient, one or more nutrient, into food so that it helps compensate for major deficiencies in large populations. So it can't be done because you have 1.5 people who have a problem in one part of the country. You don't fortify a food for that kind of a public health problem. And whereas supplementation is where the same nutrient or 2 or 3 nutrients are given as medicinal form with the help of a healthcare system that monitors it and recognizes any kind of side effects or inability for of the population, inability that the population might feel in consuming it. So there are lots of supplementation programs that we have in India. The oldest one, of course, is iron folate supplementation to pregnant women, which started way back in the 1969, 70, 71, if I remember right. And that is because we recognize that pregnant women were like anemic, 70, 80% in those days. And the number or the major cause of maternal mortality, both during labor, postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding during abortions, and death were because of anemia. So this was a well-planned strategy to compensate for the lack of iron that was there in the food, or lack of iron absorption, let me put it more clearly. And perhaps pregnancy is a short duration. You could afford to give them iron tablets and monitor the women who came for checkups so that it was not done unmonitored. But this program has gone on, and with all its ups and downs, I will not discuss that. But what is very important today, we must recognize that times have changed, and we can't afford to walk into a trap, almost a trap laid out by the corporate world, because hemoglobin is not formed just by iron. Listen, even if iron was given to pregnant women, we do know that not all women reach the 10 grams or 11 grams that we desired, but definitely the 4-5 grams that we saw in the outpatient, once they were given a bit of transfusion and kept on iron tablets, we could see the women out through safe pregnancies, right? They did not come out with 11 grams, but these were desperate times. Today, we know that iron is not the only cause of anemia. There are many other causes, but iron is very important. It's also important to know hemoglobin is not made just out of that iron atom or molecule. Hemoglobin is a complex molecule which requires proteins, which requires a whole range of other substances, minerals like calcium, iron, copper, magnesium, vitamins like B12, folic acid, vitamin C. I mean, it's a molecule that is dense and rich in a large number of nutrients. That is why it's said that heme protein is a very good source of iron and other nutrients for anemic women. But that apart, now what we are made to believe is iron is going to do the magic, which will sort of replace every other kind of intervention. It's not just the synthesis of hemoglobin. It's also, before an iron reaches the liver or the bone marrow, the absorption is a huge, huge problem. The iron absorption in Indian diets is not more than 5 to 8%. So if you're consuming 1 gram of iron, you're unlikely to, 100 milligrams of iron, you're unlikely to retain more than, absorb more than 5, and nobody consumes 100 milligrams, but just for calculations, 5 to 8%. Yes, you can improve the absorption if you add animal proteins with the diet, or if you consume heme proteins, that is the heme iron, that is liver, that is organ meat, etc., etc. So these, or if you consume vitamin C rich foods and fruits with your diet, iron rich iron. But otherwise, you have to eat like a cow. All the greens that we have been promised does nothing for us in vegetarian diets. Even if you keep eating like a cow, munch the greens the whole day, the iron will not be absorbed. So it is futile to push iron into our bodies without all the additional support systems that the body requires to absorb it, to manufacture the hemoglobin, and that to see that the hemoglobin is viable in the body. So that's the whole problem. There are many, many other things. You need proteins, not just for the globin part of hemoglobin. You require proteins at transport proteins, storage proteins. Iron is a very, very volatile molecule which has oxidative properties, which means it damages cells. So a lot of iron in your intestines is going to react with our intestinal mucosa, which is, as it is, very badly damaged by the infections and infestations that we have. So it's going to change the microbiome in our intestines. So loading the system with iron has its own problems. It is well known that the Chinese tried to solve many of these problems by giving iron once a week. They realized iron every day was causing a kind of damage which was undesirable. Now, by adding iron to rice and imagining that we will change the face of the world is making a mockery of science. Okay, and this can only be done by people who do not want to understand the physiology of hemoglobin formation and the treatment of anemia. Now, to add to the mess is the fact that in our country, you have huge undernutrition. When I say undernutrition not just of calories, proteins, but a whole range of nutrients. Children, for instance, 25-30% are underweight, 25-30 are short, and many 10 to 15 would be wasted, which means even those short heights, the kids don't have adequate weight. Okay, so this is the kind of starvation level at which the population is surviving. All of them are on the margins as far as most nutrients are concerned, which is largely vitamin A deficiency, vitamin C deficiency, folate, B12, you name it. And these children, now what have the children done with such poor diets? The children have not written a letter to the Prime Minister. They have just stopped growing. That is their answer to the nation, that we'll wait when you have enough food for us. Instead of providing more food, we have the gumption to think that giving iron in a cereal-based diet is going to do the magic. I think it's an humiliation of the worst kind that we can mete out to our children's population. That apart, let's just remember that during undernutrition, just by giving iron, there's going to be no magic, because the children don't have enough quality protein. They don't have enough B12, folic acid. You'll get B12, folic acid, vitamin A largely from animal foods. You can get a little bit of vitamin A and folic acid or riboflavin from plant foods, but not as much as you would get from animal foods. So we have this problem of a whole food fascism that is now controlling what diets people can eat and cannot eat, thanks to the prevailing socioeconomic political environment. At this time, Fortification of cereals with iron is adding insult to injury. Now, supplements have been there. I think we need supplements of iron and folic acid for pregnant women, for uh, uh, children, etc. They need to be evaluated, and we need a report on where to go. But fortification cannot be the answer. Now, one would say that we have salt, which is fortified with iodine, but that was well thought through. We had a large number of experts in various fields when they realized that up to 40 to 50% of people living in the Himalayan regions had goiter and mental retardations of children, and iodine was the main reason. Inadequate iodine because of the fact that the rainwater did not contain iodine. It was a well thought through technology which was launched in this country. But it's also known iodine is not stored in the body. So whatever iodine you consume goes out into the urine and is not there. There are chances of toxicity, hyperthyroidism, etc. have been talked about, but nothing stops us from investigating these side effects. But it is true that the goiter incidence has come down to below 5%. Where was 45 and 50% and where is 5%? So it is a well worked out strategy. Now, if you come to wheat fortification of iron, there can't be a bigger insult than this, because wheat flour in the West is only fortified when the wheat flour in the West is maida. Now, a country that eats whole wheat like us will have to change our dietary patterns if we need to absorb the iron from wheat flour. And a very well worked out quality of a well worked out practice of eating rotis with whole wheat is going to be replaced with maida, and you know what the consequences are. Refined flour is the only flour in which iron is likely to be fortified, which might be absorbed, because whole wheat has a lot of phytates and fiber which prevent iron absorption. So is it the fact that the people who are in the forefront do not want to discuss science, or is it just a commercial interest, is the kind of questions we should ask. And any solutions that we suggest at this stage cannot be exotic solutions of a small organic farm in some corner of the country, which it must be upscaled, whatever solutions we provide. And they cannot be the result of personal preferences of veganism or vegetarianism or whatever else. Let's remember 60, 70, 80% of our population would like to eat animal foods provided they have incomes. Now, the solution is really diversity. One of the main reasons why people cannot afford the variety of foods. Now, why am I talking of diversity?
Veena ji, you have 2 more minutes to wrap up.
Yeah, the basic principle of nutrition is you must get every nutrient from more than one food. Every nutrient from more than one food. And every food should give you more than one nutrient. If that is a principle, then diversity is the only solution. And for diversity, we definitely need money, that is buying capacity, better wages. Otherwise, it's just a slogan that doesn't mean anything. And the last thing perhaps I would like to say is that with this iron fortification, do we have any idea what the consequences would be in terms of tuberculosis, in terms of malaria? It's very well known that tuberculosis, malaria, and many other infections just become uncontrollable when iron is given at that acute phase of these infections. And unfortunately, there are also feelings that perhaps we should fight iron fortification because our hemoglobin standards need to be reduced. I think this is a wrong thing to piggyback that, and that needs a lot more discussion, debate. But as on today, we cannot afford that. Anemia is used to piggyback a whole change in production of the food systems, the distribution, collection, production. I mean, all that will be discussed, I know, later. But anemia is unfortunately being used for these purposes. Thank you, Asha. I think I'll stop here.
so much, Veena ji. Thanks for bringing in some very, very critical points. Friends, we have Tanmay, who has graciously agreed to do a quick interpretation to Hindi. Tanmay, are you there? I would
Yes,
request
I'm
you to
there.
do a very
Yes,
brief
thank you,
interpretation.
Ashleisha. I will
Go
do a
ahead.
brief translation. Please note that Hindi is not my mother tongue, but I'll try my best. So,
Thanks.
yeah. तो वीना शत्रुघ्ना जी जो है, शी इज सेइंग कि फोर्टिफिकेशन एक नया साइंस नहीं है, बल्कि एनीमिया डेफिशिएंसी एक नई अपॉर्चुनिटी जैसे उभर के आई है कॉर्पोरेट्स के लिए। और हीमोग्लोबिन की जो कमी होती है वो सिर्फ आयरन की डेफिशिएंसी की वजह से नहीं है, इट इज़ अ कॉम्प्लेक्स मॉलिक्यूल जिसमें प्रोटीन, मैग्नीशियम, B12, फॉलिक एसिड एक्सेट्रा जो है वो मिला के फिर हम हीमोग्लोबिन बढ़ा सकते हैं। आयरन से सिर्फ काम नहीं होगा, बल्कि अभी जो चल रहा है, जो इसकी एडवर्टाइजमेंट जो हो रही है ये प्रोग्राम की फोर्टिफिकेशन की, जिसमें बताया जा रहा है कि सिर्फ आयरन से एक मैजिक बुलेट की तरह है जो काम हो सकता है। बाकी जो चीज़ें हैं B12, फॉलिक एसिड, जिसके लिए वैरायटी ऑफ फूड्स लगते हैं, एक विविधता लगती है खाने में, जिससे ये सब कवर हो सकता है। एक ही खाद्य से या एक ही चीज खाने से ये नहीं होगा। तो और चिल्ड्रन, बच्चों की जो फोर्टिफिकेशन है उसमें हमको एक डिटेल स्टडी चाहिए, ये काफ़ी मात्रा में नहीं है अभी जो बेसिस चल रहा है जिसके भरोसे ये सब करना है। आयोडीन की जो डेफिशिएंसी हिमालयन रीजन में डॉक्यूमेंटेड अच्छी तरीके से थी और उसके लिए आयरन फोर्टिफिकेशन एक अच्छा सॉल्यूशन था, बट वो एक स्पेसिफिक जगह के लिए था। ऑल ओवर इंडिया ये एप्लीकेशन नहीं होगा। और रिफाइंड फ्लावर जो है, मैदा जो है, उसमें आयरन का अब्सॉर्प्शन अच्छे से होता है। अभी हम सब लोग जानते हैं मैदा कितना अच्छा होता है तबीयत के लिए या बुरा होता है। तो क्या ये सिर्फ कमर्शियलाइजेशन के लिए एक अपॉर्चुनिटी बन चुकी है, ये सवाल आता है। तो इसका सोल्यूशन क्या है? डाइवर्सिटी इज द ओनली सोल्यूशन। विविधता जो है खाने में, डाइट में, वो एक सोल्यूशन होता है इसके लिए, एक ही सोल्यूशन हो सकता है। और आयरन के ज़्यादा मात्रा में या सिर्फ आयरन फोर्टिफिकेशन के जो साइड इफ़ेक्ट्स है, ट्यूबरक्लोसिस, मलेरिया जैसी चीज़ों का रेजिस्टेंस कम होना, ये सब का स्टडी होना चाहिए और उसके बाद ही ये सॉल्यूशन प्रिस्क्राइब किया जाना चाहिए। थैंक यू।
Thanks so much, Tanmay, for keeping it so brief. And I think there may be some repetitions with some of the speakers, so I request you going forward that you then don't have to repeat what has already been said, so that may help you to be even more brief. Thanks again, Tanmay, for supporting us. Our next speaker is Dr. Anura. Dr. Anura Kurpad is a part of St. John's Research Institute. He's part of the Division of Nutrition there. He's a professor and a doctor, and he has recently co-authored a very interesting paper, which is called When the Cure Becomes the Malady. Why layering more fortification interventions is not the right approach. So he's the right person to talk to us about the government's fortification interventions and why so many different interventions, when they are layered one upon the other, what kind of problems can that create? So we are calling it the cure, but it can actually be a problem. So with that, I invite Dr. Anura. Please tell us a little bit about the findings of your paper and what kind of risks do you see with so many supplementation and fortification programs layered one on top of the other?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I think Veena set it up and I'll be repeating a lot, so I'll try not to. But the question that we can ask in the layering paper that we wrote was, is giving more of a nutrient a good idea? For example, giving a fortification program on top of a supplementation program like is being done for iron. And really, the question is that better? It's not, because we really think that anemia is being overdiagnosed in this country, not least, and I won't argue with Veena about metrics, but it is that we are taking capillary blood from a finger prick to measure hemoglobin, and that gives you a lower value than the real value. So you tend to overdiagnose. Second, if you thought that supplementation was not working, adding something to supplementation, should you not withdraw supplementation and then try something else? Or do you just keep adding one failed program on top of another? It doesn't make sense to me at all. And of course, if you think anemia is due to iron deficiency, it's not. Veena just told us that anemia is because of a variety of nutrients that are deficient. And finally, there are too many people, I think, in India now who are saying that, oh no, we don't have the diet diversity, it's going to be difficult. I really want to argue with them, because here is where there is a contradiction in terms. Fortification, supplementation, these are scaled up programs. Diversification of the diet is exactly the opposite. It is a decentralized program. You have to think globally, but you have to act locally. You cannot, by any means, create a diversified diet through a single method. These will vary not just by district, but even by sub-district areas. This is the point, and I think this thinking has gone out of the window. It's like everyone in the world wants scaled up. Scaled up what? Scaled up mistakes. It's very important to think locally. Again, this looks very complex. Please look. This is a program that we actually made at St. John's to try and figure out, can you make a diet for a child or an adult, anyone, to meet all these nutrients in this circle? There are about 15 or 20 nutrients. It takes a lot of programming to do this, but you can do it. And the truth is, you can do it with an optimal cost. Okay, it's 30 rupees. You can optimize that even more if you want. The point is, it has to be done at a local level. You can't take this and put this for the whole country. You have to put it for each localized place. So it is possible to create diversified diets. Don't lose heart thinking, oh gosh, it's too difficult to do. So let's go to fortification. Let's go to some other techno-utopian food. It doesn't make sense to do that. Now, the point is, I'm not so bullish about fortification, although I have studied it. I have actually given fortified foods to anemic people and found it can cause a small change in their hemoglobin. Everyone loves thinking about fortification because it doesn't require a change in behavior by the beneficiary who's getting it. It's like, even to take that supplement tablet, it requires the beneficiary to go and get the tablet and then to swallow it with water. Fortification was thought, well, they don't have to do anything, just cook their food. Automatically it'll increase. It's not true, because the process of fortification, as much as technology is good, actually creates changes in the food. Salt becomes a little dirty looking. That's what people told me at the ground level. Rice, it has to be exactly the same. If it's not, they'll take it out saying this is something wrong with it. So compliance is a great problem with fortification. And as Veena said, if it's not absorbed, you're flogging a dead horse. Now, I want to actually talk about the risks with this excess intake. Veena spoke about changing the bacteria in the gut, but I really want to tell you, don't think of fortificants in a toxicology frame, meaning you eat the fortificant and you become sick. No, you have to think of imbalance. And when you think imbalance, if any of you are cooks, like I am a bad cook, but one of the things I struggle for is, for example, in creating a masala, is that there's a balance of all the spices. You get one wrong, put a little extra of one. You know what you'll do? You'll have to put a little extra of the others. And once you do that, you'll have to put a little extra salt. It just goes on and on. It creates problems. And 50 years ago, Dr. Gopalan, who was the director and founder of nutrition in this country, he actually found this happening in poor people who had bad diets. If they ate too much jowar, they actually got another disease because there was too much of a single amino acid in jowar that caused that problem. And I want to end here by telling you that don't think of the bad effects of a nutrient by toxic problems. Don't think that iron is going to oxidize you. Iron is going to cause your stomach to burn. These are symptoms. Think of risks. Just like in today's COVID vaccine, we think of risks of bad events. You've got to think of iron like that. And here's something that has been known for 20 years, but no one's talking about it. The fact that iron is actually linked to a lot of diabetes risk, and this has been published in at least 3 or 4 great big journals. And here it is shocking. And that is that if you look at ferritin, ferritin is the storage form of iron, and it's a marker in the blood. Those who have high ferritin, and this is all done in the US because they're the people who have the money to actually measure all these things in national surveys like the N. Haynes survey or in the Boston cohorts. They found, look at this, that if you had high ferritin, you had a risk that was 4 to 5 times. In other words, those with a high ferritin were 4 to 5 times likely to get diabetes. And that diabetes was either because the pancreatic beta cells were being destroyed or because there was more insulin resistance. It was everything you wanted. And there are many papers out now for us to read, but we have to understand this. India is already the capital of diabetes. I mean, that's something it's mind-boggling that we talk of it like that, but I'm quoting someone else. Add to that, we add iron. And remember this, men are the most at risk. Men have no way to remove iron from their bodies unless we actually ask them to go and give a blood transfusion, a blood donation. That's how bad it is. And we are doing this to all the people in India, everyone. And Veena said this right at the beginning. Give it to the right people, no problem with that. But if you do these things or putting it into the PDS, I just do not know what we're going to do. And it's high time we started looking at chronic disease risk. It's not just diabetes, it's also high blood lipids. And that leads to cardiovascular disease. Iron is not a friendly element. Neither is vitamin A. None of these. We started fortifying when we began to think about disease and symptoms. Veena spoke about goiter. That's a disease, a symptom. Now we are beginning to fortify, not based on a symptom, but what I call based on a metric, which is take a blood sample and you say, oh, there's subclinical deficiency. What on earth is a subclinical deficiency? I don't know. But if you're going to start treating this whole country based on a subclinical metric, which is doubtful, I truly worry about the future. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Anura, for these very enlightening points. And now I want to invite Tanmay. Could you please do a quick translation to Hindi?
Yes, just a minute. तो डॉक्टर अनुराग कुरपाद जी जो है कह रहे हैं कि पहले से ही जो प्रोग्राम्स चल रहे हैं सप्लीमेंटेशन के या अनुपूरण के, उसके ऊपर ये फोर्टिफिकेशन के प्रोग्राम्स है. तो एक के ऊपर एक प्रोग्राम स्टैक करने से सॉल्यूशंस नहीं आएंगे. हमको ग्लोबली सोचना चाहिए, लेकिन लोकल लेवल पे एक्शन लेनी चाहिए. अगेन जो विविधता है खाने की, वो एक किसी सिंगल तरीके से नहीं होगा. तो लोकल लेवल पे सॉल्यूशंस आ सकते हैं, थोड़ा क्रिएटिवली सोचना पड़ेगा और डाइवर्सिफिकेशन जो विविधता है उसके बारे में सोचनी पड़ेगी. फोर्टिफिकेशन जो है वो बहुत पॉपुलर है प्रैक्टिशनर्स के एरिया में, क्योंकि उनका सोचना है कि इसमें बिहेवियर चेंज नहीं लगता है, बट वो एक्चुअल केस नहीं है. टेस्ट और अपीयरेंस, खाने का जो दिखने का तरीका है, जो स्वाद का है, टेस्ट है, वो चेंज हो जाता है और इसलिए जो सक्सेस रेट है वो भी लो होता है. कंप्लायंस जो है, लोग जो जिन मात्रा में लोगों को एक्सेप्ट करना चाहिए वो नहीं करते. बैलेंसिंग जो होता है न्यूट्रिएंट्स फोर्टिफिकेशन में एक प्रॉब्लम हो जाती है. अगर हम एक कंपोनेंट बढ़ाते हैं, जैसे आयरन ज़्यादा डाल दिया, तो उसको बैलेंस करने के लिए बाकी जो चीज़ें करनी पड़ेंगी वो भी हायर मात्रा में लगती है. और इसके जो साइड इफ़ेक्ट्स है, कुछ अगर चीज़ें ज़्यादा हो जाती है तो उसका साइड इफ़ेक्ट्स भी स्टडी करना पड़ेगा. फॉर एग्जांपल डायबिटीज रिस्क हाई हो जाती है, आयरन की मात्रा अगर ज़्यादा हो गई तो मधुमेह की रिस्क ज़्यादा होती है। यूएस में स्टडीज है जो प्रूव हो चुकी है इसको लेके, तो इसका काफ़ी थीसिस अवेलेबल है। इंडिया में ऑलरेडी क्रॉनिक डिसीजेज जो है, लाइफस्टाइल डिजीजेज जो है, डायबिटीज मधुमेह की तरह हार्ट डिजीजेज, उनका ऑलरेडी प्रॉब्लम है, तो इसके ऊपर और हमको प्रॉब्लम नहीं चाहिए। दैट्स ऑल, थैंक यू।
Thanks, Tanmay. So now I would like to invite Dr. Vandana Prasad. Dr. Vandana Prasad is a part of the Public Health Resource Network. This is a network that has really been assessing and monitoring different public health services and programs. And so with that, Dr. Vandana Prasad, could you tell us a little bit about the several nutritional interventions in our country, such as the ICDS, midday meal, Balwadi programs, all of these, why have they not worked? Why are they going now with fortification? Is that the right approach, or is there any way that you think that these programs can be improved?
Thanks very much, Ashlesha, and thank you to Asha for initiating this very important discussion. Thanks also to previous speakers for raising very valid points, many of which I agree with, and a few that I don't. Ashlesha, you'd given me a list of 3 questions. Should I kind of go into those, or would you like me to particularly just focus on the services to start with?
No, sure, Vandana ji, you can go into all of those, and maybe
Yeah.
I'll just maybe you can also say what the questions were before you kind of address them.
So I think there's a kind of a logical lead in to the first question, which is the importance of diverse diets. क्योंकि दोनों ही जो वक्ता रहे हैं, दोनों ने हमारे खाद्य की विविधता जो है उसके महत्व के बारे में कुछ उन्होंने जरूर बोला है. So I just like to say a few more points about dietary diversification. You know, this very question of why dietary diversification is at one point it seems, you know, so self-explanatory, but I think it needs to be reinforced that all of us as human beings eating what we consider good food is very, very, very central to human existence. Okay, so even before we start to talk of nutrition, malnutrition, so on and so forth, I'm a public health expert and a pediatrician, and I'm trained to look at populations. Now, from the point of view of a population's health, which includes their social well-being, their cultural well-being, their physical well-being, so on and so forth, I cannot reinforce sufficiently how important having something that they consider decent food is. Okay. Now, would any of us want to be eating monotonous food day in, day out, day in, day out? So food diversity is something that is central to human rights. That is, I think, very important to recognize. Now, after that, हमारी जो मतलब nature has been so clever in so many ways to create the balances that both the previous speakers have talked about. कि जब हम कुछ भी natural तरीके से विविध खाना खाते हैं, तो हमको जो सारे पोषण के जो हमको जो balance चाहिए वो हमको उपलब्ध होता है, और उस तरीके से उपलब्ध होता है जिससे कि हम उसको absorb कर सकें. Veena and Anurag ji both spoke of, you know, the relevance of absorption. So when we eat natural foods, we get it in the right combinations, and we get it in a way in which we can absorb all these nutrients better. So I think the thing is to maintain balanced diets, to maintain diverse diets is hugely important to health and to nutrition. So, and it cannot be replaced by a vertical से एक अलग-अलग करके आप पोषक तत्व किसी खाने में जोड़ते जाएं, तो उससे जैसा अनुराग जी ने बताया, ना तो आपको बैलेंस मिल पाएगा क्योंकि एक चीज दूसरे का इम्बैलेंस क्रिएट करती है, और ना ही उससे वो सब चीजें हमको उस तरीके से मिल पाएंगी जिसकी जरूरत होती है टू क्रिएट मीनिंगफुल थिंग्स इन द बॉडी, लाइक हीमोग्लोबिन, जो वीना जी ने बताया कि केवल आयरन से कुछ नहीं होने वाला. आपको आयरन चाहिए तो आयरन के साथ प्रोटीन भी चाहिए, आपको प्रोटीन चाहिए तो आपको दूसरे माइक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट्स भी चाहिए. तो इस सब का जो कॉम्बिनेशन होता है वो खाना होता है, वो अच्छी गुणवत्ता का खाना होता है, which has to be diverse. So that's the basic importance of diversity of diets. But what is the status? I think people have mentioned this, but just to understand, हमारे देश में केवल ज्यादा से ज्यादा 10% बच्चे हैं जिनको खाने की वो विविधता मिल रही है जो उनको मिलनी चाहिए 2 साल से कम उम्र के बच्चे. Can you imagine that? 10% across the board. Now, when you disaggregate this further, it's very, very clear the disaggregation in terms of class, meaning जो अमीर हैं उनका ये कम रहेगा, ये मामला, ये दिक्कत, और जो गरीब है उनकी कई गुना ज़्यादा, caste, gender, and many other such factors. So अगर हम सबसे गरीबों की बात सोचते हैं and the most vulnerable people, the degree of the lack of food diversity is absolutely dismal and critical in this country. 75 years after independence, people are not getting decent food. That's what it means. So that is the whole struggle and that's the whole fight. कि बता 10% बच्चे और कुल मिला के सारे पॉपुलेशन में देखें तो अबाउट 50% से कम है, जिसमें अमीर गरीब सब शामिल करके बता रहे हैं, 50% से कम है जिनको ढंग का खाना मिल रहा है इस देश में. It is an absolutely critical, and dismal situation that we are at. So to provide solutions, I think Veena said it very clearly, of this variety, कि भाई चावल ही खाते रहो आप, keep eating only rice, and we'll just keep dumping in one nutrient after the other to make it better for you so that your hemoglobin goes up, is a complete travesty of social justice, complete travesty of rights to food and nutrition, and so on. So I think that it has to be battled on that front also. Now, the second question that the organizers had placed to me, so what are the irreversible impacts of this? Now, in terms of toxicities and so on, both previous speakers have mentioned that, but I am going to speak of public health impacts. जब हम जन स्वास्थ्य की बात करते हैं और हम एक बड़े पैमाने पे स्वास्थ्य की बात करते हैं, सोशल डिटर्मिनेंट्स ऑफ हेल्थ, यानी कि स्वास्थ्य के सामाजिक कारक जो हैं वो हमारे लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाते हैं. What is it that's causing the problem in the first place? What is it that's causing anemia in the first place? What is it that's causing malnutrition in the first place, which is also leading to anemia in the first place? Because anemia is more than malnutrition, granted. But again, as I said, if you disaggregate it on the basis of class, caste, and everything, we know that the most malnourished are the most anemic also. And the rest will be mildly anemic. So it is a problem, गरीबों की problem, it is a problem, SC, STs की problem, it is a problem जिनको खाना नहीं मिल रहा है, उन्हीं की problem. And that is what the main thing is. अब उसके जो सामाजिक कारक हैं, उस पे आप 75 साल से कुछ ना करें और ऐसे केमिकल्स डाल के आप उसका इलाज करने की कोशिश करें, तो इलाज कैसे कामयाब हो सकता है? Study after study has shown that, both speakers referred to it, कि at the most what you get is some increased stores of iron. You still don't translate that to hemoglobin, which is what you need as a functional requirement. अपनी बॉडी को कामयाबी से काम करने के लिए हीमोग्लोबिन चाहिए, उसको फेरिटिन नहीं चाहिए. फेरिटिन से उसका काम नहीं चलेगा. और fortification पे जो शोध हो रहा है, all the research is showing us that at best it increases ferritin levels, and very, very marginally, if at all, some studies show it increases hemoglobin levels. Certainly not the ideal solution. अब इसका cost क्या है? Public health में cost benefit analysis बहुत मायने रखता है, कि मतलब इस पलड़े में एक चीज से फायदा हो रहा है, उसी चीज से कुछ नुकसान भी हो रहे हैं. हर चीज से कुछ फायदा होता है, हर चीज से कुछ नुकसान होता है. कौन सा पलड़ा भारी है? So we have seen that the costs are minimal and the risks are so many apart from the toxicities. What are the risks? The opportunity costs. Again and again, we fail to work on dietary diversity by putting all our money, all our ideas, all our innovations into how to add chemicals to food. That is complete nonsense. So when are we going to start on the business of dietary diversity at a scale? Now here I just want to mention, because Anurag ji ने कहा कि ये at scale नहीं होने की चीज है. I don't agree. The method cannot be large scale. The method cannot be centralized. But the process is one of decentralization. And we have engaged with public systems to say how this can be. I'll just come to public systems in a minute. So हमारा process जो है dietary diversification का, वो agricultural diversification से उसको शुरू होना पड़ेगा, और तरीके की decentralization से उसको जाना पड़ेगा, गुजरना पड़ेगा. और लेकिन process is common, is that of decentralized decision making on food, decentralized availability of food, and so on and so forth. So I think that the process has to be scaled up, not the method of adding a chemical to food. So that's so what is the irreversible impact? One is कि आप लोगों को processed foods की तरफ ज़्यादा धकेल रहे हैं. Any nutritionist worth their salt will tell you that the less we process food, the more healthy it is. Very clear. It's another matter that only the rich can afford to, eat fresh fruits and vegetables the way WHO prescribes them. 5 times a day, you're supposed to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. Which one of us can manage it? Leave alone any poor communities who are getting maybe, a tiny amount of greens in the whole day, maybe meat only once a month, dal even once a week to once a month. These we have actual data, actually primary data to say that. So यहाँ पे to say कि fresh fruits and vegetables आप तो मतलब what are we pushing people towards? More and more processing. Processing से क्या होता है? Nutrition पहले निकाला जाता है, nutrients को पहले निकाला जाता है, फिर उसको add किया जाता है in terms of fortification. So we are now by adding another layer of processing only to food instead of going for diversification, which will allow us better access to fresh foods and vegetables and meats and animal-based sources of protein, which are far superior to vegetable-based sources of protein, as people have said. We are again going towards something that is known to be not useful, which is processing. Why are we doing this? If not to benefit, people who process foods. So these are the basic questions. So the irreversible impact is on the what should have been done. There's an irreversible impact that we are not doing it, the opportunity cost of it, plus what is being done, pushing foods towards more and more processing. And the third, but not least, which will come up later in this discussion, is the damage to the microeconomy, which further causes malnutrition and anemia amongst the same. Why? Because it is endangering people's livelihoods. जो microeconomy है food system की, उसको मैंडेटरी करने से आप उसको धकेल रहे हैं, उसको आप बंद कराने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि कौन कर पाएगा ये फोर्टिफिकेशन? ये छोटे छोटे हमारे मिलर्स, किसान वगैरह तो नहीं करेंगे, तो किसी कंपनी में होना पड़ेगा. You need standards, you need labs, you need things to prove that something is fortified to standards and so on and so forth. So the damage to the microeconomy, which further hurts the same families who are suffering from anemia and food deficiency and lack of food diversity. So how will you treat? So एक तरफ से आप fortify कर रहे हैं, which is of doubtful benefit, but what are you damaging? Just about everything else. You're damaging the microeconomy, you're damaging the food diversity of that local area, you're damaging the environment, the ecology, and everything. So the cost benefit analysis is not at all in favor of mandatory fortification, and most public health experts would agree with that. Now coming to our large schemes and programs that have been very critical to food security in this country. अभी कोविड के दौरान भी हमने देखा है कि इन्हीं के वजह से लोग जिंदा भी रह पाए जो जिंदा रहे हैं, मतलब क्योंकि खाने की कमी भीषण है, लोगों को काम नहीं है, लोगों की सारी savings have been completely gone in medical expenses and so on. People do not have salaries, people are not getting livelihoods, not getting wages, not getting employment. It is these public systems that have kept people alive, not just now in this emergency and disaster, but the most food insecure still depend for 8 months of a year upon these systems. But what are they giving? Cereal, and nothing but cereal. So where is the diversity here? Why can we not introduce diversity here? The Right to Food campaign, with which I've been centrally involved for quite some time, and also Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, the People's Health Movement India, we have been advocating that what's the problem with introducing eggs in the Anganwadi system and the midday meal system? Then we come up with Akshay Patra and so on, who will not do it on religious grounds. We come up with state governments who claim that the entire state is vegetarian when it's 75% non-vegetarian. So where people culturally eat animal-based sources of protein, please kindly go ahead and introduce that. What's the problem? There's absolutely no problem in compliance. There's absolutely no problem in acceptability and so on and so forth. And where there are vegetarian communities, yes, other things can be done to create some degree of sufficiency of protein and iron and so on and so forth there also, and those recommendations are also there. Why are we not using millets? That's not a non-vegetarian source, so that even vegetarians would be quite happy to have that. Why? It is there in the National Food Security Act, but has it happened? Has the implementation happened for millets? Not. So there are very, very specific things, recommendations that we've been saying, which will make iron sources better, which will make food diversity better, which will make it better in a way in which it can be absorbed and utilized by the body to make hemoglobin, not to create stores of iron which are going to lie around and create difficulties in our liver and spleens. But nobody has done that because there is a political economy of it. So correctly said by Veena right at the start, there is a whole political economy of fortification which favors big food. And big food is being favored by doing something which I have been writing and talking about a lot, which is creating food drug confusions. हमारा ये कहना है कि देखिए दवा को दवा रहने दीजिए, सप्लीमेंट्री प्रोग्राम्स को अलग से आप डील कर लीजिए, आप खाने को दवा मत बनाइए, खाने और दवा का मिश्रण मत कीजिए. Leave food alone and let supplementary medicines and so on be done independently. Just a few last points, because it's a pleasure to hear peers. And we're trying to create arguments. So I just want to say one or two things with respect to Dr. Kurpad's presentation. I think if we say that, fortification and supplementation together is not a good idea, I think there'll be no hesitation in taking away the supplementation program. And if we say that it's going to be mandatory, which is what is coming up, mandatory, then people will not have the choice to exhibit their lack of compliance, because there's not going to be permissible to have alternatives either. So I think that the strongest arguments today are the lack of benefit, the opportunity cost, the harm it does to social determinants of malnutrition and anemia, the fact that we can do very specific things in large scale programs, the PDS. So PDS, what have we been saying? कि आप दाल तो दे ही सकते हैं, आप तेल भी दे सकते हैं, और इनको locally source करिए. All PDS we've been advocating for decentralized systems of procurement, of storage, and then distribution. These have been very, very clearly detailed by the Right to Food campaign in very specific terms, what it will cost, what infrastructure it needs, so on and so forth. Who's listening? Who's taking it up? So in the Anganwadi, we've said, allow communities to decide what meal should be done. We are running very large scale programs for children under 3, creches in tribal, in PVTG areas. We allow them to decide what they want to feed their children, but we make inputs also, because it is not that everything community decides is going to be also okay for malnutrition. So we sit together, we negotiate together, we decide together, कुछ उनका चलता है, कुछ हमारा चलता है. Decision making, क्या खाना चाहिए मेरे बच्चे को, बच्चा हमारा है, उसको क्या खाना अच्छा लगता है, हमारे गांव में क्या खाना अच्छा माना जाता है, क्या हमको अच्छा लगता है, क्या उसका कोई मायने नहीं है? Is there absolutely no say that we are going to have in the feeding of our own children? Surely we can decentralize the program and create those flexibilities. So create flexibilities within the Anganwadi program, within the midday meal program. Do not allow large-scale programs to be taken on by people who can impose some religious diktat upon a program. It is not, we are a secular country, we're not a Taliban state yet, we're not a religious country yet. Do not allow this to happen. Allow local decision making and make nutritional inputs there. हाँ, ये जो आप खाना चाह रहे हैं, इसमें हमें लगता है कि अगर ये ऐड कर लेंगे तो शायद हमारे बच्चे और तगड़े बन पाएंगे. इस तरीके की मतलब चर्चा होने के साथ हम खाने को क्या खाना मिलना चाहिए किसी भी कार्यक्रम में, इसका डिसाइड कर सकते हैं और आराम से कर सकते हैं. यदि सरकार के बस की नहीं तो हमसे पूछ लीजिए, हम मिलके करवा देंगे. So I'm only saying that even in our large scale programs, there is a lot to be done. There is other evidence. I don't know what my time is. Nobody has spoken up. So
yeah, Vandana ji requests you
to
wrap up as soon as you can.
So there's just some other, very clear evidence that dietary diversification can be improved by, agricultural diversity. So this is another very big focus area, which I'm sure other speakers will speak about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vandana ji. And actually, we are ending the first session of our program today. But before we do that, I'd like to invite Dr. Arun Gupta, who actually might need to leave soon. So we are just going to bump his part up in the program. Dr. Arun Gupta, he's a pediatrician and he's also the convener of the Alliance Against Conflict of Interest. So as Vandana ji already said, there's a political economy question. There's big food, which is going to get more power now as a result of these policies. And there's a real conflict of interest issue because some of these entities are involved in the policy making. So Dr. Arun Gupta is someone who is involved in these issues. And I'd like to invite him now to tell us about who these entities are that are pushing for fortification, and what are the kind of conflict of interest issues here. Dr. Arun, are you there?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
You must be on mute. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Thank you, Asha and Ashlisha, for a request for acceding to my request to speak earlier. It's because of a technical reason that I have to be in another meeting soon. Thank you so much. अभी जो मैं मिक्स्ड बात करूंगा हिंदी अंग्रेजी मिला के ताकि टाइम बचे थोड़ा. एक मिनट में अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन शेयर कर लूं. तो आप देख सकते हैं प्रेजेंटेशन को. प्रेजेंटेशन को देख सकते हैं.
Yes.
मैं अभी ये कहना चाहता हूं कि जो अभी वीना, वंदना और अनुरा ने बोला है वो उसमें कोई दूसरी राय नहीं है मेरे पास। एक बात जो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि इसके पीछे क्या है। अब हो सकता है वो ऑल टुगेदर ऑल नहीं हो कि जो मैं कहूँगा अभी, पर मेरा मानना ये है कि हम कई सालों से, पिछले 30 सालों से देख रहे हैं कि जैसे ये पॉलिसियाँ कैसे बदलती हैं। मुझे आज जयती घोष का एक आर्टिकल याद आ रहा है, बहुत साल पुरानी बात है, जब कांग्रेस का जमाना था, मॉन्टेक सिंह जब सीईओ थे, उन्होंने एक आर्टिकल लिखा था मॉरल इलास्टिसिटी पे। तो वो जो पॉलिसी मेकर है, जिसको मिलते हैं, जिसकी बात सुनते हैं, उसी की बात को ही आगे बढ़ाते हैं। तो ये जो इम्पोर्टेंट एलिमेंट है, जो मुझे ये लगता है कि अभी जो पिछले 5-7 साल में हमने फूड पॉलिसी में देखा, जो अभी फोर्टिफिकेशन ले लो, चाहे अभी एक फूड पॉलिसी बन रही है फूड सेफ्टी में, फूड सेफ्टी अथॉरिटी में सब कुछ शिफ्ट करना इटसेल्फ ये एक बहुत बड़ा एलिमेंट था, जो कि फूड सेफ्टी का मैंडेट नहीं था ये, बट उसमें सारा कुछ, उसमें न्यूट्रिशन पॉलिसी को शिफ्ट करने का हो रहा है। उस वजह से ये प्रॉब्लम जो बढ़ रही। तो मैं आपसे ये शेयर करूंगा कि कौन लोग इनके पीछे हैं और क्या हो रहा है और किन लोगों पे आपको ध्यान देना चाहिए। जैसे ये गेट्स एंड टाटाज एंड ये जो 3-4 संस्थाएं हैं जो फूड फोर्टिफिकेशन सेंटर का हिस्सा हैं, ये और ये जो मैं स्पेशली गेन के ऊपर मैं लाइट और एक साइट एंड लाइफ जो हैं, इनके ऊपर आपका ध्यान खींचना चाहूँगा। अब ये जो 2002 की बात है, जब ये वॉल स्ट्रीट जर्नल में एक लेख छपा, गेट्स फाइट्स malnutrition with cheese, ketchup and other fortified foods. So, this was something which on that day, Gates put in $50 million and set up what we call as GAIN today, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. तो ये सेटअप कर दिया, बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों के साथ MOU कर दिए गए। क्राफ्ट फूड है, प्रॉक्टर गैम्बल है, हाइंज है, वाइटमिन मैन्युफैक्चरर रॉश है, जो कि बाद में DSM ने खरीद लिया, BASF कॉर्प। सो ये बड़े बड़े प्लेयर हैं जहां से ये चीजें आती हैं। जो इनका काम था न्यूट्रिएंट्स को ऐड करना खाने में और टेक्निकल असिस्टेंस ऑफर करना सरकार को कि हम आपके आटा दाल में सब कुछ ये डलवा देंगे, आपको चिंता करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं। तो यहाँ पे पॉलिटिशियन जो है, या जो अपने मेंबर्स ऑफ पार्लियामेंट हैं, या ब्यूरोक्रेट हैं, IAS अफसर हैं, या जूनियर अफसर हैं, तो वो सब इन चीजों को बड़ा अच्छा समझते हैं कि कौन मिल रहा है हमसे आके। गेन ने प्रॉमिस किया कि वो उनके टैक्स रेट कम करवाएगा और रेगुलेशन को फ्रेंडली करवाएगा। उसका मतलब ये है कि आपके ऊपर कोई जोर आजमाइश नहीं होगी, जो आपने करना है आप करिए। और इस तरह गवर्नमेंट का एक सील ऑफ अप्रूवल लेने के लिए उन्होंने ये भी डिसाइड किया कि पब्लिक रिलेशन के जो कैंपेन है, जैसे अपने अब ईट राइट चल रहा है, ठीक है, इससे पहले डाइट फॉर लाइफ चलाया FSSAI ने, तो सील ऑफ अप्रूवल मिल जाती है उनको गवर्नमेंट की। तो ये जो स्टोरी है, अगर आप इन 5 लाइनों में देखें, ये स्टोरी ऐसे प्ले करी जा रही है हमारे कंट्री में, जिससे ये फूड पॉलिसी क्रम्बल कर रही है डे बाय डे। तो ये दो भी मेन एलिमेंट है उसके, एक तो जो वंदना ने कहा प्रोसेस फूड वाली पॉलिसी, दूसरा ये फोर्टिफिकेशन वाली पॉलिसी। जो अब ये बड़े बड़े लोग कैसे जुड़ते हैं, देखिए टाटा और बिल गेट्स ने 2015 में ये टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में लिखा कि फोर्टिफिकेशन इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव सॉल्यूशंस टू माल न्यूट्रिशन। तो माल न्यूट्रिशन को बाजार बनाने की पूरी कोशिश जो है वो बड़े बड़े लोगों से होती है, जो कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर को फोन करके कह सकते हैं भाई ऐसा कर दीजिए। तो वो इस तरह होता है काम, जो ये जो शिफ्ट होता है सारा। तो ये जो जब गेट्स आके मिलता है प्राइम मिनिस्टर को या हेल्थ मिनिस्टर को, $2-4 मिलियन या कई बार $200 मिलियन भी पकड़ा देते हैं वो, और साथ में ये भी बोल देते हैं भाई ये काम कर दीजिए। आजकल तो वो खैर वैसे ही सरकार के साथ इनका MOU हुआ है नीति आयोग में, और सरकार के साथ जो न्यूट्रिशन पॉलिसी पे डायरेक्टली गेट्स जो है वो इंटरवीन करता है। तो चौथा जो अगर पार्टनर जो फूड फोर्टिफिकेशन सेंटर में है, WFP जो फूड प्रोग्राम है, कहने को तो UN है। अब देखिए इनके पार्टनर कौन कौन है, ये यम, कारगिल, ये जनरल मिल्स, ये बड़ी बड़ी फूड कंपनियां हैं जहां से ये फंडिंग आती है इनको। तो ये फंडिंग, ये आज ही मैंने सारा इंफॉर्मेशन आज ही इकट्ठा किया है, फ्रेश है ये उनकी साइट से ही लिया है। तो ये अगर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट नहीं है तो क्या है, तो उसकी तरफ हम कोई ध्यान नहीं दे रहे। मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ जो भी तीनों स्पीकर्स ने बोला है उसके पीछे क्या है, मुझे लगता है ये बहुत मेजर स्कैंडल है जिसको कोई ध्यान नहीं दे रहा है। अब न्यूट्रिशन इंटरनेशनल जो चौथा पार्टनर बताया जाता है बहुत बड़ा, अब ये वो कहते हैं कि हम सपोर्ट लेते हैं कहाँ कहाँ से, ये देखिए गेट्स फिर आ गया यहाँ पे। ये सब एक, मुझे लगता है ये एक ही थाली में है सब लोग, वो आपस में एक दूसरे को सपोर्ट करते रहते हैं। ये पावर ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन, फिर यूएन में बाकी यूनिसेफ, WHO वगैरह, इसमें टिपिकली यू नोट दिस ऑस्ट्रेलिया, यूनाइटेड किंगडम एंड कैनेडा, दीज गवर्नमेंट्स आर आल्सो एसोसिएटेड इन फंडिंग न्यूट्रिशन इंटरनेशनल। न्यूट्रिशन इंटरनेशनल के ये भी लिखा हुआ है कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर पार्टनर कौन कौन है। उसमें आप देखिए ये मैकडोनल्ड है, DSM है, BASF है, ये बड़े बड़े। अब इसमें मतलब नहीं समझाया उन्होंने पार्टनर का। मेरा मतलब यही, मेरा कहना यही है कि ये सबसे बड़ी कंपनी है इस समय जो ये न्यूट्रिएंट सप्लाई करती है। तो न्यूट्रिशन इंटरनेशनल पहले माइक्रो न्यूट्रिएंट इनिशिएटिव होता था, ये इसका नाम बदल के न्यूट्रिशन इंटरनेशनल रखा गया। उसमें ये क्या है कि न्यूट्रिशन की एक्टिविटीज करते हैं, तो ये एक तरह का PR एक्सरसाइज हुआ कि हम तो न्यूट्रिशन पे काम करते हैं, हम माइक्रो न्यूट्रिएंट पे नहीं करते। ये बड़ी कंपनी है, ये लेख शायद आपने पढ़ा होगा, आपने जो डाउन टू अर्थ में छपा था कि ये 4-5 मेजर कंपनियां हैं, BASF, लॉन्जा, एडिसो, रॉयल DSM, जो मैं लाल रंग किया इसलिए कि इसकी तरफ जरा ज्यादा ध्यान दीजिए। यही है सबसे बड़ा प्लेयर इस समय जो कि सारी गड़बड़ करा रहा है। और कैसे करा रहा है, अब ये देखिए अब ध्यान से। हिंदुस्तान ने, सरकार ने तो शायद स्केलिंग ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन को पार्टनर नहीं बनाया, अपने आप को ये न्यूट्रिशन में मूवमेंट कहते हैं, बट UN में इसको जगह मिली। इनका जो डायरेक्टर हैं वो UN में असिस्टेंट डायरेक्टर जनरल की पोस्ट पे है। तो अभी ये आप देखेंगे तो ये जो इनका एक हिस्सा है स्केलिंग का, ये एक बिजनेस नेटवर्क चलाते हैं जो कि पहले किसी भी ग्लोबल न्यूट्रिशन में जो सब कमेटी ऑन न्यूट्रिशन होती थी, पॉपुलरली कॉल्ड SEN, उसमें कोई इन्वॉल्वमेंट नहीं थी इनकी। तो उसको रिप्लेस करके इतनी पावर थी इन कंपनियों की कि ये स्केलिंग ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन मूवमेंट SEN को रिप्लेस कर दिया। अब रिप्लेस करके ये कहते हैं हमारा विजन है मार्केट बेस्ड सोल्यूशन ढूंढना। तो ये जो सारी बात है पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी की, वो मार्केट से उठ रही है, और जो सुनने वाले लोग हैं वो मार्केट में बिलीव करते हैं। तो ये सारा मामला। अब ये 2 पॉइंट जो नोट करिए आप, स्केलिंग अप न्यूट्रिशन के बिजनेस नेटवर्क के कन्वीनर कौन है, गेन और वर्ल्ड फूड प्रोग्राम फिर इकट्ठे हो गए। गेन का काम ही यही था, ये सबसे पहले अपने आप को पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप कहा करते थे 2002 से 2008-10 तक। फिर इन्होंने WHO में अप्लाई किया कि हमें पार्टनर बना लो। WHO ने कहा आप तो कंपनियों के साथ काम करते हो। ओवरनाइट उन्होंने एक कागज पे जो अपना बिजनेस नेटवर्क था वो ट्रांसफर कर दिया स्केलिंग अप न्यूट्रिशन को, और आप उसके को कन्वीनर बन गए। WHO ने उनको मान लिया, WHO के वो ऑफिशियल पार्टनर हैं अभी। तो इससे शो क्या होता है कि WHO चाहता है कि ये काम हो। तो ये जो है सारा मामला बड़ा कॉम्प्लेक्स है, नो डाउट, पर मुझे इसमें कोई शक नहीं है कि ये बड़ा मोटिवेटेड है। अब गेन की प्लान देख लीजिए 5 साल की, उस सबसे बड़ा प्रोग्राम उनका लार्ज स्केल फोर्टिफिकेशन है। उसके बाद मार्केट प्लेस फॉर न्यूट्रिशियस फूड है, उससे बड़ा जो ग्राफ है उनका। अब ये नीचे देखिए, दे स्ट्रेंथन करना चाहते हैं स्केलिंग ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन बिजनेस नेटवर्क को। तो इसमें सारी 400 कंपनियां हो गई हैं, मैंने सुना है। बड़ा खुश है बिजनेस नेटवर्क वाले कि हमारे 400 कंपनियां इसमें जुड़ चुकी हैं ऑलरेडी। अब ये देख लीजिए कि इम्पैक्ट फॉर, अब ये मैं बताना चाहता हूँ कि ये मल्टी स्टेक होल्डर, ये एक बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है, मैं उठाना चाहता हूँ कि ये मल्टी स्टेक होल्डर नेटवर्क जो है इसमें
Dr. Arun, some of the audience wants you to speak in English as well.
Okay, this is a multi-stakeholder initiative called Impact for Nutrition. इसमें भी देखिए, you can see how many partners there, UNICEF, Tata Trust, Sight and Life. इसके बारे I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you about it. Eat Right, you know, FSSAI की prime, this is the prime movement of, you know, FSSAI on our food. वो सोचते, they are thinking that Eat Right will set everything right. So then the CII, PATH, World Bank, everything is involved in this. ये क्या कहते, they are doing some nutrition education here and there, but the major point is multi-stakeholderism. So my major, one of the key point which I want to make is that please be very careful when you see the word stakeholder. This was floated in somewhere in the late 90s. After 98, I think, Sustainable Development Program jab shuru hua, uske baad this word was floated. And this was to send off the calls for accountability into responsibility. So change kar diya gaya. दो चीजें जन्मी फिर. Two things born out of that was stakeholder dialogue and public-private partnership. तो ये सब उन्हीं चीजों की देन है. सारा UN, सारी गवर्नमेंट्स अब इसके पीछे लग गई हैं जैसे ये कोई जादू है. It's like in that sense. So I'm offering some solutions before then I'll show you a little website which shows the history of Sight and Life and how they are involved in all of that. So I will suggest you to stop.
You have 2 more minutes, Arunji. You have 2 more minutes.
Yes, I have 2 minutes. Yeah, yes. You need to stop to oppose these use of these terms called stakeholder and multi-stakeholder platform. There is a need for a legal framework or a guideline to prevent and manage. According to our information on RTI, since 2013, we have been asking, there is no department or government having any guideline on conflict of interest for which the state has the duty to protect its people. There is an example for WHO's Convention, Article 5.3, to set up a conflict of interest policy. So I'll just take 2 minutes to show you the Sight and Life stuff, which is very important for you to understand. Yeah, so Sight and Life, एक vitamin A, it was meant for vitamin A, some NGO, but in 2005, it transferred to DSM. So DSM took it over, and after that, it has been playing the role of the front organization of DSM. Then it got into World Food Program partnership with DSM. Then it gave rise to Micronutrient Forum. Then, if you see, it entered Scaling Up Nutrition in 2010. ये उनकी website दिखा रहा हूं मैं. You are seeing the website of Sight and Life history, which shows how the whole micronutrient fortification and the micronutrient program is floating. Then you see these people being awarded by them, those who were the David Nabarro and this famous scientist Robert Black, who has been being paid by Nestle, and several other people who are paid by these companies. So then they also joined partnership with Bill Gates Foundation, PATH, and so much. This is a treat to watch in that sense. I won't take much of your time. I will stop here. If you have any question right now, I will be happy to take. I have time. So, over to you, Ashlisha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arun, for alerting us to these very nefarious kinds of connections between big companies, philanthropy, and the government, and the nexus around this. So friends, if you have any questions for the first 3 speakers, please post them on chat, send them to me, because not all the speakers will accompany us till the end, such as Dr. Arun already said he's going to leave. Ajay, are there any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so we received some questions on email, and I'll invite any of the speakers. Okay, so there's a question here. One question is, how is the tolerable upper limit in a population calculated in fortification programs? And is fortification a better intervention than other targeted interventions? So I'm just going to say out all the questions, and I'll invite each speaker to respond to. And anyone who's raising their hand, I request you to paste the question in the chat to the admin. That will help us to collate them. Another question is that FSSAI has been saying that fortification is just one complementary approach. So they are saying that in principle, they are going for dietary diversity. But do the speakers see that as true? Is the FSSAI showing the same kind of enthusiasm for dietary diversity as it is showing for fortification? And Okay, so I'll invite any of the speakers to answer any of these questions. Veena ji, Vandana ji, Dr. Anura.
I'm ready to speak
Go
on
ahead.
some of these things.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just start with the last one where there's so much enthusiasm for fortification. That really comes from the earlier requirements documents in which it was thought that the requirement for nutrients was very high. It was iron, for example, was 30 milligrams per day. Do you know what the new requirement is? It's half that. Vitamin A, half again. So if you look at it, what's happened now in the NIN ICMR requirements in 2020, these have come down so much that it now becomes possible to meet these requirements through a normal diet. You don't need to put chemicals in food. It's already there. And that's the point about the diverse diet. It is accompanied by a reading, which I think FSSAI needs to do, a reading of the 2020 NIN requirements. They are much lower now. I will re-emphasize that. Now, you asked about the TUL, tolerable upper limit. This is a toxicological frame where what you do is you look at the internet and you look at findings where people say someone took so much of this nutrient and had this side effect. Based on that, you figure out with some amount of calculations what you will put as your tolerable upper limit. So for iron, the level was set at that level at which some people had complained about gastric irritation. But the fact is, as my other co-speakers have said, if you actually just give fortification, this was found in Africa, that with fortified foods, children in Africa showed that their stools and their microbiome had more bad organisms or invasive organisms just by fortification, not going up to the tolerable upper limit. The tolerable upper limit is 40 to 45 milligrams per day. Earlier, NIN was saying we require 30 milligrams per day, too high. You now know women require 14 to 15 milligrams per day. Men require 10 to 11 milligrams per day. It's that low. It's just that you don't use the iron properly because you don't eat the other things that are required. So I want to go back to that diversity thing, but also tell you the tolerable upper limit is set in these ways. I will now defer to my other panelists because I'm sure they want to say something.
Yeah, I just want to make a small point, which is that, and Veena, I think, will agree with me that RDAs are also complicated and problematic because they are, as you were saying, sir, that, normal diet should meet these lowered requirements. But actually, we are, for instance, my work in the last 30 years, I've been dealing with highly malnourished and pretty anemic. I mean, hemoglobins of 3 and 4. So we are at one end of this spectrum where the RDAs simply do not suffice, and nobody can say that that would be adequate to fill, ongoing kind of deficits. So I think that there are many things we don't know enough about, but the more we decentralize and leave things natural and make sufficiency, availability and sufficiency, and keep a moderate pace on things. That is what I understand as a medical doctor also, that moderation in these issues, because we know also that our population is very tolerant. It's very resilient to low hemoglobins and to stunting and wasting and everything. Our mortality rates are not high as compared to other countries where we have similar situations of food insecurity. So I think that we must continue down a reasoned and sensible approach. And so not all of these figures are necessarily immediately applicable to all our communities. I think that's one point of the whole decentralization business, that I would not, for instance, I'm not interested in lowering standards of what apply globally to what is good and what is bad on the one hand. On the other hand, I feel that the RDAs are probably insufficient for many of our populations. Yeah.
Can I respond, please? I really want to set something correct here. Please do not equate an RDA for a clinical situation with a population requirement. These are critically different things. And that is what we did in our requirements when we set them. the estimated average requirement, or called the EAR, is what you prescribe for a population where people have unsupervised intakes. If you have a patient and you're supervising what they eat, by all means give more. You have to. But that is a therapeutic thing. It's not natural, normal nutrition. Please, let's get these two things very clearly put. Otherwise, we will be confusing a clinical approach and a public health approach. And all our standards come from public health. We know this. But you apply them in clinics with a great deal of other knowledge. It's common sense. You can't apply a BMI standard to a wrestler and say, oh, you have a BMI of 30, you must be obese. You, of course, look at the other things like muscle mass and activity, and you change it. So same with nutrition. Let's not confuse the estimated average requirement for a population with the RDA, which is what you use for individuals under supervision.
I think I was actually
Thanks,
saying the same thing, but anyway, I think I didn't make myself clear.
Thanks. Veena ji, would you like to say anything before we move on to the next section of our program?
I think a discussion on RDA should be held at another time if the group is interested, because it is when 50% of the population have deficiencies, low muscle mass, a whole range of problems with anemia. When I say 50, I mean 30 will have one and 25, etc. And RDAs are meant for normal populations. And do we have a normal in India? For instance, we have women who go around with 35 kilograms of weight. Do we have a diet for a population that must put on weight? So these are the things that I think we are all struggling in the field, and Vandana is talking about it. A 35 kg woman doing heavy work, what is it? What do I give her? That of, what is the calorie? If you leave it to the corporates, they'll ask her to eat half a kilo of sugar because that'll give her 200 calories. I mean, that is the obscene level at which they will calculate calories. But in the field, with a low muscle mass, with marginal anemia, with very little diversity, what is the kind of diet do we give her? I don't think anyone has addressed it. NIN also hasn't addressed it. RDA is meant for normal populations, and we don't have that species around very much. The other end is the obesity in the well-off and the upper middle class. That's also not normal. So, Dr. Kurpad, I think we should have a discussion, and I would really look forward to that.
Okay.
1 second, Dr. Kurpad, before you come in, there's 2-3 other questions which have come in. We'll just do a last round. I'll just announce them, so whoever wants to take them on. One of the questions is to Dr. Vandana. What does a diet diversification program look like? How will that be implemented at the local level? Someone has asked for examples. Another question is about a biofortification, which I know Afsar Jafri in the next session is can tell us about that. So we'll skip that question. One question is that apparently iron supplementation leads to, I'm sorry, is it stopped during infections? How is this managed with fortified foods? So, and then a final, I think, yeah, these are the questions. So I'll invite any of the speakers to take on these questions. And Dr. Arun, you too, if you want to address anything, please let us know.
I can address a question last, which was FSSAI is doing anything on the diversification of diet rather than the other thing. I think the whole force of FSSAI is being applied on to bring in corporations into it, to do the multi-stakeholder platforms. First, they created a Diet for Life project in which they allowed infant formula companies and exempted them from the existing law. And then we had to fight for 2 years to get it off. And now after that, this new things, eat right. These are both corporate driven stuff, which are taking us into the blaming game of that is the people who are to be blamed, not the policy, because you have to eat right. Right? We tell you eat badam and kaju. We tell you eat phal, and we tell you eat vegetable, and you eat it, right? So, but Vandana said, and very clearly positioned that what we can eat depends on what is available what we can afford, what we can. So the FSSAI has been entrusted with this task, to my sense, politically. And I do not see any political thinking or any political move towards addressing the problem of availability of diverse food for children under 2 years, which Vandana very clearly showed. And year after year, or since 30 years, we have been noticing, we are actually measuring it also. The problem lies here. Why do we measure them in NFHS 1 to NFHS 5, and the number is still really leading around less than 20% children? So I don't think there is a political will to address it. The Prime Minister left the Council of the Nutrition 4 years back, handed over to the CEO of Niti Aayog, who doesn't know what nutrition is, and meets only when there is a requirement of these corporates and others to decide something for that. So all that is, I think, is a very, very fragmented and crumbling food policy, in my view. That's what FSSAI is doing, more harm than good, actually. I don't know the part of the, I can't comment on their part, which they are mandated to do on the food safety part, but anything good they are being done. So I do not want to take part in that because I don't know about it.
Thanks. Dr. Vandana, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so in some sense, I had answered, so anyway, there are models of such programs and there are elements that can be taken to scale. So just to give some elements, I would say that the funding must come from government and from our tax money. The funding of these programs, decentralized programs, has to come from the government. I would say central rather than state, because center has more and more bankrupted states in very many different ways through the finance commissions and the cesses and so on and so forth. I won't get into the finance. So, but financial self-sufficiency community cannot bear. So let's get that out of the way. We are spending about 50 rupees a day per child. It could be 30 to 50, as Dr. Kurpad also said, around 30, 36, 40, 50 rupees per child per day to provide about 75% of the child's requirements in our programs. And that has to be borne by our tax money. So central funding, but community-based, community-owned, with collaboration with technical experts. This is very clear. So, transfer power, give flexibility. How we are running an ICDS program for since 1975 with zero flexibility. Delhi decides what is going to be done in the ICDS program all through it, whether it's a PVTG, village, whether it is an OBC community in a slum, anything. What is this nonsense? So create flexible spaces and create capacities for people to understand nutrition, demystify nutrition, make the understanding, I'm saying a modern understanding of nutrition, combine that with what traditional understanding there is and strengths in the traditional understanding. All this we have at micro level done, because in the NGO sector, that's all we do. Small is beautiful and all that. But all these elements can be made available to the public schemes and programs, provided somebody is willing to put in some effort. Yes, magic bullet, it's much simpler to produce something from a factory and and who cares whether it's implementable or effective or not? That 20 years later, some other government will pay the price for it, So I think that if there's a will, I think the political leadership in Odisha, there's some political leadership that is supportive of community ownership. And you can see that the programs are very different. The decentralization levels, they are problematic. There are lots of problems, but very different from other states in the country already. So there are very clear-cut examples, I think, of what can be done, and we can help you to, no time just now to spell these out. But basically transfer power to community with capacities, with better understanding, and all these comprehensive programs. It can't just be another vertical program. Comprehensive means what? So also do kitchen garden, also try to diversify agriculture, also try to have better agricultural processes, which others will, spell out for us. Also do this biofortification and so on. Many skills have been lost. Many traditional knowledge. Somebody asked me directly, why do we have malnutrition in spite of natural diversity in diet? What natural diversity of diet? Please look at all the data for what 24-hour recalls and all are showing us. No, people are eating only rice, only cereal. That natural diversity in some golden past. I don't know about this golden past. I never saw it. And, I don't think it actually ever existed. So if you look at life expectancies and so on. So I think that diversity has been a problem for the poor and the vulnerable, which is the majority still in our country. So it is, some people have gone the other way into obesity now. And some people have, very, very tiny percentage who can look after, go to gyms, look after their diets, eat fresh fruits and vegetables 5 times a day, and afford to become vegetarian because they can eat fresh foods and vegetables 5 times a day. I mean, it's like that. So there is no natural dietary diversity in this country. Data is showing you that 10%, 20%, what does this mean? Nobody's eating good diets in this country.
Thanks so much, Vandana ji. And now we want to move on to the next session. Dr. Kurpad, did you have any final? I think you were in the middle of a thought.
I just wanted to say that I do think I agree with Vandana about what she has said. I do think it has to be decentralized, but here's one thing I want to say. We seem to have faith in agriculture when agriculture is by definition a monoculture system. And I think the agriculturists have divorced themselves from horticulture. In fact, the truth is the kitchen gardens that are being planned or planted, they could do with a lot of horticultural input. There has to be a quantitative diversity, not just a qualitative diversity. There has to be adequate amounts of fruits and vegetables throughout the year in different seasons. And horticulturists know all about this, not agriculturists. So I hope you will ask them as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And now, in the interest of time, we are going to end these questions now, and we're going to actually open it up for Q&As at the end, but not all speakers will be there. So hold on to your questions and keep sharing them as you are. So let's move on to the next part of our program today, which has to do with the economic implications of mandatory fortification. So for that, we have Afsar Jafri with us today, who's an agriculture and trade analyst. He's a researcher and he's been working in the ag sector for the last 2 decades, and he has analyzed lots of policies of the government related to food and trade. And so Afsar, I'd like to invite you, and he also works with an institution called GRAIN, which is a research and advocacy organization on food. So Afsar, the question for you is, when the government makes fortification mandatory, and we have already said that some big players are going to benefit from this, what kind of impacts will be felt by small players, by informal players, by local rice millers, oil millers, cooperatives? What kind of market shifts are we looking at? What kind of impacts do you foresee on consumers? So welcome, Afsar.
Thanks, Ashlesha, and thanks to Asha for giving me this opportunity. In fact, as Ashlesha introduced me, I work with the GRAIN, which is a small non-profit organization that works to support small farmers and social movement in their struggle for community-controlled and biodiversity-based food system. In fact, there are evidences which really indicate that the mandatory fortification of food will have adverse economic impact on informal players like small millers and oil ghanis and cold press units, farmers, as well as on consumers. And fortification of food is yet another attempt by corporate food processor, national or international, to monopolize the processed food system. In fact, if you look at in the past, there are several attempts has been made in India alone to promote processed food, and the target was unprocessed, healthy, fresh food. One of the example I can cite here is the dropsy epidemic in Delhi in 1998, which was related to adulteration of mustard oil with argemone, which is a weed. And there were a few cases of deaths, around 60, 70 people died, where a few thousands got impacted. And the mustard was adulterated with not only argemone, but also with burnt engine oil. And this whole epidemic happened only in Delhi and in surrounding areas. And in Navdanya, when I was working with Navdanya at that time, we did a small study to look at, what kind of impact it has had. In fact, one of the major impact was immediately after dropsy, we can see, the packaging order was introduced, and that packaging order for edible oil. And after that, the edible oil was only available in packaged form. And I did a small study, in fact, a small survey to find out about a year after this packaging order and epidemic dropsy, which affected Delhi, there were several hundred small ghanis I have noticed in Mehroli, in small, because in Delhi there are several villages or which called Lal Dora area. वहाँ पे काफी घानी जो थी, जो ऑयल प्रेस यूनिट्स जो थी, वो क्लोज हो गई सिर्फ एक इम्पैक्ट से. और उसके बाद यू कैन सी देयर वाज inundation of import of soybean oil from Argentina and from USA, and this was all GM soya oil which was coming in India. So I mean, this one dropsy epidemic was basically targeted against the small units who are processing edible oil, because the corporations, especially at that time when we did a study, we found that it was a solvent extraction unit which was behind it, and they wanted the soybean oil to be promoted in India, and India started importing it. The second similar trend we have seen when the packaged atta was introduced in India. After the packaged atta was introduced, we saw that several small units which processed fresh atta was closed down in Delhi and around Delhi area. So who are the corporates who are really getting benefited out of it? It is really the big corporations like Conagra, Bunge, Cargill, and there are several Indian corporations also which are now becoming multinationals. So they are the ones who are getting big business out of it. Now, if you look at in Pakistan, a similar trend is happening right now, where the Punjab province have introduced pure food regulation 2018, and they have banned the loose milk, and they have made milk pasteurization mandatory. And that is really impacting the smallholders farmers in Pakistan. And there is only one option left for those people, the smallholder dairy farmers in Pakistan. Either they have to scale up and bring all kinds of safety and food standards to run their small dairy units, or die out. We see a similar trend coming in for the small oil seed crushing units. We call it them ghanis, small rice millers, wheat flour units, and they will have a similar fate, because either they have to scale up or make huge investment to make their units technologically fit to undertake fortification, or they have to quit the business. This will threaten small rice and oil processing units across the country, and it goes against the drive to make India and people self-reliant. Now, if you look at the technological upgradation cost, it's really too high. And the indicative cost of producing rice through fortification for medium-sized mill is around 32 million rupees, which is 3.2 crore. And there are, that is the reason. I mean, a lot of rice millers association in Punjab and Haryana, they had to, stop the processing for 3 days because they were opposing the procurement of only fortified rice by FCI. But there are other international evidences which shows that there are large-scale processing firms tend to coordinate with large producers. जितने भी बड़े प्रोसेसिंग है वो छोटे छोटे यूनिट से ना लेके वो कोशिश करते हैं कि बड़ी प्रोसेसिंग यूनिट से ले, बड़े प्रोसेसर से ले, तो उनके लिए वो आसान होगा. और ये एक आम एविडेंसेस पाया गया इंटरनेशनली. दूसरी एक चीज और जो देखी गई है कि द एक्सेस टू इनपुट्स एंड टेक्निकल एक्सपर्टाइज, this can be a barrier for small domestic units to engage in fortification activities. एक study अभी, in fact it was not a study but it was basically a paper, a consultation paper issued by the Ministry of Women and Child Development on 24th Jan 2017, और ये indicate करता है कि कितने लोगों को ये impact करेगा. In fact, this study or this consultation paper says, and they in fact had also invited views and comments on this consultation paper in 2017. It says that there are about 1,200 roller wheat flour mills in India, about 800 automated chakkis, stone grilled mills, and approximately 2.8 million small chakkis. And this consultation paper also says that the wheat that is milled in small chakkis is difficult to fortify. Only the atta that is produced by organized sector is fortifiable. Organized sector produces atta only for sale as branded atta in urban, peri-urban markets. This is actually a minuscule proportion of the whole. This will require time to scale up as the industry to install the necessary capacity of automated chakkis to handle huge volumes. So you can imagine the kind of, the people who are going to face a livelihood issue once this fortification is, fully introduced. Now, so the same paper also says that the Indian oil industry is extremely fragmented with hundreds of local producers spread across the country and within the different oil processing states. Oilseeds crushing units, which are estimated to be 150,000 across the country, include crushing units that are small scale, medium scale, and also large scale. All the edible oil that is produced by organized sector and sold in packaged form is fortifiable. Fortification of edible oil by organized sector is relatively simple. It is estimated that 30% of the packaged oil is already fortified voluntarily by the industry. Oil produced by unorganized sector and it is sold in loose is not fortifiable. It means basically I'm trying to highlight the people whose livelihood will be impacted because of the fortification. And this is a government paper. I mean, though they have not said that, but this is, we can draw out the conclusion from it. Now, mandatory fortification of milk will threaten the livelihood of small and marginal milk producers who own 1, 2, or 3 cows, or buffaloes, or goats. And it goes against the family farming and benefits to local nutrition. It is also against the drive to make India and people self-reliant. Now, we can also say that the farmers who would like to sell their produce directly to consumers will also be adversely impacted because of the mandatory fortification requirements. And there are, rice producers who, especially the farmers, I mean, they will be impacted because the government who would procure rice, they would only try to take those rice where the fortification can be easily possible. So this whole, program for fortification is a strategy to push small producers out. And there are studies which show that fortification program lead to increased market share of formal players and reduced market share of informal players. Now, who are going to benefit out of it? I mean, there's a Down to Earth, in fact, did a study which shows that just 5 multinational companies, Germany, BASF, Switzerland, Lonza, France, Adisseo, Netherlands, DSM, and ADM, Archer Daniel Midland. They are the ones who manufacture micronutrients, and all the Indian entities, they sell micronutrients imported from them. So they are the ones who are going to the beneficiaries of this fortification drive. And it will create around a assured market of 1,700 crore to these 5 multinationals. Now,
Afsar, you have 2 more minutes.
In fact, there is also a threat because of once these multinationals take over, there is a threat of cartelization. In fact, European Union has they find such companies for cartelization behavior. In fact, if you look at the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, Child Development paper, they also have said very clearly that there's going to be a minimal increase in monthly per capita expenditure in both rural and urban sectors of India. So it is for sure that the people, I mean, the people who will be impacted are also the consumers, because their daily expenses for purchasing fortified food will increase. So these are some of the impacts of the economic impact of the fortification, what we can see here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Afsar. I want to invite Tanmay now. Tanmay, can you do a quick interpretation to Hindi of what Afsar said?
Yes, yes. तो अफसर जाफरी सर ने जो आर्थिक नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट्स है हमारे देश के जो छोटे उद्योग है उनके ऊपर फोर्टिफिकेशन का क्या नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट है इसके बारे में बात की। तो इसके कई विपरीत परिणाम है और उन्होंने बताया कि मैं मोटी मोटी बात बोल रहा हूँ कि फोर्टिफिकेशन अगर कंपलसरी हो गया तो जो छोटे राइस मिल्स और ऑयल घानी है, तेल की घानी है, उनको अपग्रेड करना पड़ेगा, यानी उनका उन्नयन करना पड़ेगा। तो उसकी कॉस्ट 32 मिलियन रुपीस है और ये बहुत बड़ी कॉस्ट है जिसको ये छोटे लोग नहीं कर पाएंगे क्योंकि उनकी एग्जिस्टिंग मशीनरी से ये काम नहीं होगा फोर्टिफिकेशन का। तो करोड़ों की जो मात्रा में जो छोटे उद्योग है उनको ये नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट हो जाएगा और एक तरीके से ये छोटे जो प्लेयर है वो एब्सोल्यूट हो जाएंगे, ऑब्सोलीट हो जाएंगे इस मार्केट से। तो और ये कार्टेलाइजेशन का भी थ्रेट है, यानी सारे जो बड़े मल्टीनेशनल्स हैं जिनको ये बेनिफिट होने वाला है तो वो एक गुट बना के उसका प्राइसिंग और जो पॉलिसी है वो सब कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं। तो ये सारे नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट्स है और इसको हमको बहुत सोच के सावधानी से एग्री करना चाहिए ये पॉलिसी।
Thank you, Tanmay. I now want to invite Mr. Raja Sankar. Mr. Raja Sankar, he is an oil miller. He has a organization called Purva Naturals, and he's from Tamil Nadu. He's also designed many different oil milling equipment, and he's in touch with many local oil milling initiatives. So welcome, Raja ji. For you, since you are a local oil miller and you have been working on promoting natural and unrefined oils and local oils, what do you think the impact, and Afsar has already kind of spoken upon this. What do you about this? What impact do you think you will face and other small oil millers? And since you're working on unrefined oils, what do you find that there's a nutritional difference between the refined fortified versus the unrefined oils? And what would you like to say to the government as an oil miller yourself? So welcome.
Thanks for the invite, Ashleisha. I'm very, very happy to be part of this. I'm not as much a scholar as all the previous speakers are. I'm just a farmer who is doing a small value add of my products. So I'll keep it short. See, when you asked about fortification, I'll tell you what, basic things like what an oil mill is doing by itself, if we do it the most natural way, I think it doesn't need any extra fortification. That's my personal stance. But apart from that, I see this whole thing as a requirement from a small unit to scale up. Scale up for what? What is scaling up? Scaling up is a very, very tough and serious question, which we all get carried away by. Basically, because we think numbers are scaling up. It's not. I think quality of the product is not a measurable thing. Of course, it's not a tangible thing, but that loses whenever you scale up, without doubt. So fortification, if I'm mandated to do fortification, then that means I would have to make a lot more investment. As Mr. Afsar said, my investment levels will go up pretty high. One. Second, if I invest so much, do you think I'll be keeping quiet, or will I be expecting to get it back? Simple, right? So if I have to get it back, then I start making compromises. So the moment my quality is beaten for profits, then the whole thing dies by itself. So the whole idea of fortification, which is at least quote unquote saying that it's good for people, would not be, because first of all, we don't know what we are fortifying with. Second, is it an essential thing, or is it not there? Is there any other way? We are not investigating enough to do this. which is a big fallback, I think. So I think to answer your question, I personally believe fortification will kill all of people like me who are trying to do genuine natural oils. It'll simply kill all these small industries. Maybe that's the agenda, we don't know. But that is the first thing. Second thing is you asked about refined and unrefined. Do we know why we are refining the oil? It's for the looks. Most of this refining, the so-called thing, is the presentation issue rather than the food issue. If you see that refined oil looks very clean, like water, and unrefined oil is a little bit slurry, it's not because what looks better is better, right? In fact, if you have not refined your oil, I can actually vouch for it, saying that it increases the quality of the oil, definitely. We have seen it happen so many times. Of course, we are not equipped enough to do all these lab tests and prove with some media reports. But fact is, unrefined oil, which makes you use lesser oil, one, which makes you consume lesser oil compared to the refined oil, because it has a lot more viscosity and a lot more inherent qualities which the ground. See, what are we refining or purifying from? Let's say I'm making groundnut oil. We are trying to purify the groundnuts that are there, right? Which are maybe microparticles of groundnut. Is groundnut something that needs to be purified, or is it something that we can consume? We can as well consume it. There's no issue with eating a little bit of small groundnut in the oil, right? So what are we trying to do when we do refining is it's focused on the visual impact of the product rather than the quality of the product. So refining is, why refining is there? Because the big companies can do it easily, the investment. If I have to set up a refinery here, it would cost me much more than to do the unrefined oil, economically, first. Second, in terms of the value that my oils give to the customer in terms of their health, I believe that unrefined oil is definitely 100 times better, or just to put a number, than the refined oil. See, the whole idea of refining, adding so many chemicals, phosphoric acid, bleaching powder, all that, the whole process, I've gone through that whole process to see what is happening in the oil. But finally, what we get is just the fat, not the value of the oil. Because oil is not just fat, right? There are other things. Why do we use different oils for different things? The Indian cuisine is actually perfect in terms of doing that. But we have lost all that basically because we are trying to make everything look clean, not actually clean, look clean, which is the biggest problem. So refining is, for me, bad. Refining is more a showpiece, which takes away the value from the product that you're eating. So what, if you ask me what we should do, or what the government should do for us, if we move away from the big mentality, making everything big, making everything huge, or the numbers game, all that, if we take ourselves away from that and try to allow this type of micro units which can sustain by itself and deliver to a local community, we would have made a very big impact in the economy overall. We have made a very big impact in the people's life. We would have made an impact on the small entrepreneur who's trying to do a thing for himself. I think that's pretty much it. But I don't know whether that tendency to move away from big will be accepted, or for the different forces, as I think all these people have outlined it. There are so many other big forces which are acting on killing the small units and the small entrepreneurs. Given that, I don't know, maybe we are all fighting a losing battle doing these small things. That's
Thanks so much.
for me.
That was excellent, Raja Sankar ji. That was really, really useful for us to understand the whole process of refining and why it's important to actually empower the local communities. So friends, before Tanmay comes to translate to Hindi, please share your questions. If you have questions for Afsar and Raja ji, share your questions now and we'll take them up after the translation. So Tanmay, please come.
Yeah, just a minute. तो राजा जी ने जो बात कही है, उनको लगता है कि ये फोर्टिफिकेशन जो है सिर्फ स्मॉल बिजनेसेस को स्केल अप करने के लिए है क्या, ऐसा उनको डाउट है। और इसकी वजह क्या है, ये किस लिए हो रहा है, ये सब चीज़ें जो है उसकी कोई मतलब ठोस वजह लगती नहीं है। और ये छोटे उद्योगों को बर्बाद कर देगा। जो तेल का जो डिफरेंस है रिफाइंड और अनरिफाइंड में, सिर्फ रिफाइंड तेल दिखने में अच्छा है, बट जो दिखता अच्छा है नॉट नेसेसरली वो अच्छी उनमें क्वालिटीज होती है। तो और ये रिफाइंड तेल बनाने का जो धंधा है उसमें बहुत कैपिटल लगता है और बड़े उद्योग ही कर सकते हैं। तो ये सिर्फ दिखावा लगता है ये सब। तो इसमें उनकी सरकार को सलाह है कि ऐसी पॉलिसीज बनाएं जिससे छोटे उद्योग और छोटे एंटरप्रेन्योर्स, उद्योजक सस्टेन कर सके, सरवाइव कर सके, और इसमें ही सबका भला है।
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tanmay. Friends, if you have any questions, do share them. Right now, I'm not seeing any specific questions for Afsar and for Raja ji. There are some general ones which we can take on towards the end. So if there are no burning questions, then I will move on to the next section of our program today. And that is about the kind of alternatives. What are the grassroots solutions to the vitamin and mineral deficiencies across India? What do these community-owned approaches look like? What are the bottom-up approaches? And how can these approaches also support diversity of crops and holistic agriculture? So first, I would like to invite Dr. Debal Deb, who is a well-known scientist and conservationist, and he works on his farm Basuda, and which has over 500 local rice varieties which have been conserved. And Debalda, I'd like to invite you to tell us about the nutritional importance of local paddy varieties, local crop varieties, and anything else that you'd like to share that is relevant to this discussion today. So welcome, Debalda.
Right. Thank you very much, Ashleisha, and thanks to all friends, Masha, and namaskar to everyone. My task has been much facilitated by presentations of the previous speakers, especially Dr. Veena Shatrugna and Dr. Anura Kurpad and Dr. Vandana Prasad, who have all already discussed about this, the fallacy of many of the assumptions, the so-called, I would say pseudo-scientific assumptions of, magic bullet approach of solving this micronutrient deficiency in the population by fortified food, single food like rice and others, rice grains, and in this case, now there's also one edible oil, just one vitamin and mineral like that. So I will not go into the detail of all the other things have been already, the economic and political implications and the unscientific basis of all these assumptions. I will directly, go for this direct estimation. I mean, the work of the alternatives. What are the alternatives that are that can be made? One is that, I simply say that when we already have a plethora of nutritious food stuff available, different kinds of vegetable and non-vegetable foods. Now, as long as these are available and cheaply available, very easily available to the local people, especially the forest dwellers, the villages where I'm working, very poor, but they are resource rich from the environment. Not necessarily all are cultivated, not necessarily all have to be purchased on the market. As long as these are available, I don't consider this mandatory food fortification an intelligent option. I would rather say it's scientifically ridiculous. Just giving this, the iron deficiency. We are all aware. Everyone understands that iron deficiency cannot be solved simply by adding some quantity of iron to the food, because it requires different other kinds of folic acid, vitamin B12, zinc, and vitamin C in order for assimilation of this iron from the food. But assuming that all of these other components are fulfilled by some magical imagination, and let's assume that no, only iron is the deficit in the food, then why should we have to fortify this rice? We first make this the polished rice to make it available, then inject this iron into this kind of this unbrand or polished rice. While the brand rice, there are, in my own study, which have been published now, at least 2 papers were published covering 550 rice varieties, of which more than 86 varieties of rice, all traditional varieties, not corporate sector rice, not genetically modified rice. 86 varieties of rice already contain huge amount of iron content. This table, you see the bottom line is IR 68144, etc. This is a huge name. It's the genetically modified iron fortified rice developed in IRRI in collaboration with Monsanto and other places, other corporate sectors. And that contains, they say this is the 3rd generation iron fortified rice, which has the highest content of iron, supposedly, which is 8.9. Yes.
Debal, your slides is not showing. Please.
It's not showing?
No.
Oh,
it's
but
only,
I have already.
The title. It's only the title which is showing.
But I have changed it. I'm sorry.
We can see it, but I think you wanted to change the slide.
I did
Yeah,
change.
now it's there.
Now it's visible.
Oh, I see. But previously, anyway, I just stopped it and then reshared it. Okay. All right. So in this bottom line of this, IR68, this in red color, this is the genetically modified iron fortified rice, which is supposedly containing the highest amount possible of iron in any rice, according to the publication claim. Now, just to compare with your own, I'm not presenting all the 86 varieties that we have discovered, but you just say this, Bai Dusuri is a variety from Bengal, contains 150 mg per kg. And then this Dal Getu, Bag Chapta, this is from Jharkhand, 64. So all these 130, 150, 80, 60, all of these compared with 8.9 ppm of iron. And we consider this, and the government is also going to promote that kind of, it's not only this transgenic, but also injecting iron into this, the commercial rice varieties, which is totally, anti-commonsensical. As common sense is totally absent among these people, uncommon people sitting at the policymaking institutions and academic institutions. So this is one case that we already have this plethora of food diversity. I'm just focusing on rice alone. I'm not mentioning any other food like millets and others. There are plenty of other kinds of tubers also, wild tubers, cultivated tubers too, which also contain very high amount of fig fruits, for example, have also high amount of iron. But of course, again, I repeat what Veena ji and Anurag ji have also mentioned, that just iron availability is not enough for ensuring iron bioassimilation. We have to make sure that all other vitamins like B12 and zinc and folic acid, etc., all of these are available. There are many other, also vitamin D is another focus in this FSSAI thing. Vitamin D, the cheapest and the zero cost source is sunlight. You just stand in the sunlight in the morning for half an hour and you get adequate amount of vitamin D manufactured under your skin. But even without that, we also have different kinds of meat, fish oil, fish rolls, eggs, all these animal sources are rich in vitamin D. No plant tissue contains vitamin D. That's the biggest problem for vegans, which is a new Yankee religion anyway. But vegetarians, all the vegetarian cultures, traditional vegetarian cultures, also include some animal proteins in the form of milk and milk products, and also eggs in some cases. In Kerala and Bengal, it's also fish is included in the vegetarian diet, majority. So these traditional cultures have actually adapted to this kind of deficiency. They have managed this kind of deficiency by diversifying their own diets. And I mean, as Veena ji had appropriately called this, this current regime of food fascism, some authority decides what would be the appropriate food for a proper Hindu or what appropriate religion, national food, and so on and so forth. As long as that is not there, if we stick to the traditional diversity cultural diversity and the food cultural diversity with diverse food sources, we have no problem with this vitamin D consumption. Of course, there are some mushrooms also, wild mushrooms, which grow in UV radiation in the day hours. They also contain vitamin D. And there are numerous animals. You don't have to purchase all these, these meat, kind of costly meats, or cod liver oil, or goat liver, and so on. There are hundreds of food things like stream fishes, crabs, shrimps, mollusks like snails and clams, different kinds of insects, and mammals which are trapped by many different kinds of different tribes. I'm just presenting only 5 tribal people with which I have worked over the past 30 years, and they have year-round consumption. Some of these are frequently monthly, weekly, fortnightly, and all of these. So they have a coterie of this kind of nutrient supply from the wild. I'm not mentioning all the cultivated ones. From the wild itself, it's not necessarily on the forest. Even this, the ponds and the pond banks, field margins, they can capture a mammal, they can capture a crab, and these are consumed, and they adequately supply this kind of nutrients. Now, the primary assumption is that we have to eat only rice and nothing else. That is the and only vegetarian food. That is the root of all these kind of presumptions and assumptions and the fallacies in prescriptions. Golden rice is another exactly the same line. I mean, I'm sure that FSSI is now the next step. They're going to promote the golden rice for addressing the vitamin A deficiency. Now, this again, this golden rice, the first generation golden rice, which is SGR1, the third line from the bottom, was containing 1.6. Now, the third generation of golden rice, that is GR2E, which is not yet marketed, is 29. It's been upscaled, 29 mg per gram. That's the availability. Compared with that, we have sweet potato, we have different papaya, and banana, mango, pumpkin. Pumpkin particularly is very cheap. And there are many kinds of mushrooms and tubers which are very rich in vitamin A content, which is double to 3 times higher than the GR2E contents. But apart from that, apart from this diversity, if you are considering only rice alone, because golden rice is rice, they are focusing rice, assuming that rice does not contain vitamin A. We have already discovered 25 different rice varieties from Indian source or Indian origin. I am mentioning only this just about 7 or 8 varieties, traditional varieties. You can see this highlighted one, K97, which is 27, and you can see this comparison with this one, which means compared with the first generation golden rice, it's 1,700 times. Okay, percent. That is once. That means 17 times higher. And compared with the latest one, GR2E, is 92% of what is contained in this new golden rice. So it's comparable with that. So even the only difference between them is that golden rice required millions of dollars of investment of public exchequer and corporate investment and corporate business and the profit that entails. But in none of these varieties above, all the rice varieties that contains about 8 times to 172 times higher, or 91 times higher of this golden of the vitamin A, did not require any kind of investment. It's all freely available, freely exchanged among the farmers, and they're still being grown on the farmers' fields. Is it not more rational and more sensible scientifically and commonsensically to make those varieties more available on the market and accessible to the consumers than investing billions of dollars to promote this golden rice? Common sense is again very uncommon among policymakers. So I presented here the case of folk rice varieties, only specifically rice varieties, as a paradigmatic case. Of course, there are numerous other foods, as I mentioned, millets and beans and milks and eggs and different kinds of meat and other animal sources are always naturally rich in many kinds of vitamins and minerals. It is therefore scientifically pointless, I would say ridiculous, to promote polished rice first as of a commercial variety for all consumption in ICTS programs and midday meal and everything, and then inject these micronutrients into this nutrient-less rice to address the issue of undernutrition. As long as there's so many rice varieties already available, which are already, and many other cheap food items, very inexpensive cheap food items, which are naturally rich in those micronutrients without any kind of investment. It would be a lot easier to promote.
2 more minutes, Debal.
Yeah, this is the last one. So it would be a lot easier to promote these dozens of folk rice varieties in addition to many other kinds of all these diverse food items available to the community, especially in the rural areas, for wider consumptions requiring zero industrial investment than to fortify rice grain in the mills and also oil. So mandatory fortification may also lead to unintended impacts on consumer health, which have been adequately described and discussed by Veena ji and Anurag ji and Vandana ji. So I'm not going to repeat this. But apart from these health problems, there is only one benefit that is accrued from this FSSAI mandatory fortification program is enhancing GDP, because that will increase medical costs of the consumers. And the more you spend on this medical expenditure, the GDP will then necessarily increase. So that would be the only benefit that I can appreciate. Okay, thank you very much. I end this here, and I hope everyone will take their own reason to choose which one is the best for them.
Thank you so much, Debal. And Tanmay, please, I'd like to invite you to do a quick translation. And friends, Tanmay is going to leave us very soon. So a great thanks to Tanmay for doing these excellent translations so far. So go ahead, Tanmay.
Yes, तो मोटी बात मैं बताता हूँ. देबल जी ने ये कहा कि हमारे स्वदेशी जो धान या स्वदेशी जो चीजें मिलती है लोकली, उनमें इतना न्यूट्रिशन और इतना ये स्वस्थ है कि मतलब चीप है कि ये सब फोर्टिफिकेशन प्रोग्राम करने की क्या ज़रूरत है. तो उन्होंने काफ़ी एग्जाम्पल दिए. जो लोकल वैरायटी की जो धान है बंगाल में जो आती है, उनके आयरन कंटेंट का कंपैरिजन दिया. फिर मिलेट्स, ट्यूबर्स, मिलेट्स जो होते हैं उनमें भी आयरन कंटेंट ज़्यादा होता है. धूप जो होती है, नेचुरल सनलाइट जो है, वो एक अच्छा सोर्स है विटामिन डी का. मशरूम्स भी होते हैं कुछ, उसमें रिच होती है. तो गोल्डन राइस का भी उन्होंने एक एग्जांपल दिया, जो करोड़ों डॉलर की इन्वेस्टमेंट लगती है, वेराज जो लोकल वैरायटी के जो धान है, छोटे किसान जो उगाते हैं, एक दूसरे के साथ ट्रेड करते हैं, तो उसमें कंपैरेटिवली ये अच्छा सोल्यूशन है. एट बहुत ही कम इन्वेस्टमेंट लगती है इसमें. तो पॉलिश्ड राइस करना, एक तो उसमें एक कॉस्ट है और उसका क्या हेल्थ बेनिफिट है ये सब जानते हैं. ऊपर से उसमें माइक्रो न्यूट्रिएंट्स को इंजेक्ट करना, ये सब मतलब लॉजिकल नहीं लगता है. तो इसके अनइंटेंडेड जो है वो हेल्थ की, मतलब हमारे स्वास्थ्य के लिए क्या उसका हानि है, और हमको क्या चॉइसेस करने हैं, ये हमारे ऊपर है. और हम ये सब लॉजिकल चीजें हैं देखने की. थैंक यू.
Thank you, Tanmay. Now I would like to invite Dilnavaz Variava ji, who is a member of the Sahayak Trust and also the Anemia Free India Foundation. And Dilnavaz ji has been part of several programs where they have created thousands of kitchen gardens and which have very positively impacted the nutritional outcomes of the communities and people involved. So with that, I invite Dilnavaz ji to tell us about the program and the kitchen garden program and what kind of results you have seen. And also I have a request, is there anybody from the audience who can help us to do a translation of the last 2 presentations? If you can, please send me a message and I will invite you. Thank you. Dilnavaz ji, welcome. Dilnavaz ji, are you there? You are on mute.
I was on mute. Now am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So let me start my video and give me a moment. I will try a bit of Hindi also. Organic kitchen gardens for nutrition. Sendriya Poshan Paraspag. तो ये नाम हमने खास करके चुना था क्योंकि we wanted to cover the fact that it should be organically grown, And it should be for nutrition, not just kitchen garden programs, which I had been supporting as chairperson of the Rural Development Committee of the Rotary Club of Bombay earlier. We found that this was a simple, replicable, economical and sustainable way for improving nutrition and reducing nutritional anemia. I won't dwell on this. World Health Organization says if there's more anemia in more than 40% of the population, then there is a serious health problem. This is the situation in India and Maharashtra. जो पीला है वो इंडिया का है 40% से खूब ज्यादा है और ऑलरेडी बताया कि वो maternal deaths और कई तरह के प्रॉब्लम्स होते हैं. महाराष्ट्र का परिस्थिति ये है कि NHS 4 जो 2015-16 का प्रोग्राम था और 2019-20 में जो सर्वे done in 2015-16 and done in 2019-20, the situation has got worse, not better. So obviously there is a crying need for addressing the issue of anemia.
Dilnavaz ji, did you want to show your presentation, share your screen as well?
Yes. Is it not sharing?
No, it's not sharing at the moment.
Okay, let me then do that. I didn't go to the share button. 1 minute. How do I do this now?
In the meantime, Dwiji is with us and he wanted to quickly bring in.
Would you be able to share the screen yourself?
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Dilnavaz ji.
Start from the. Okay. Aditi, can you make this a full screen? Yeah. Okay. So, is this a full screen that you all are having?
Yes.
Can you make it full screen?
Yes.
You're having. All right. So this is a situation. Maharashtra, the situation has got worse between 2014-15 and now. Next slide. The program started with the National Organization for Community Welfare. In 2010-2013, Rotary Club of Bombay and my trust, the Sayak Trust, we supported this program in Wardha district. Dr. Preeti Joshi was the lead researcher. And we started with 5 villages. We went up to 26 villages, 638 women and 200 students. In the second year, Dr. Preeti Joshi was telling me that the PHC doctors were reporting that anemia was not a problem for the pregnant women coming to them who had kitchen gardens. So I suggested that we should start monitoring the HP. And from the second year, we started monitoring the HP. Next slide, please. What we found was very interesting and surprising that there was so much difference that had taken place. And this was 1.5 years roughly, because some of them started earlier, some of them started later. And we didn't take 12 as the, or 11, which is for pregnant women and so on. This was just a general camp which was run for women in these villages. This was, since it was second year, there were just 7 or 8 villages that were being looked at. And we found that the ones who had HB of 10, which was no longer a serious problem for women who are expecting and so on. In villages like Jamni, Amgaon, Antargaon and so on, where, and Hiwara and Nanbari, where the number of percentage of women with HB of 10 or more had been only between about 6% to 32%, had increased enormously after they started the kitchen gardens. In Masla and Charmandal, it had not increased. There was a problem of wild animals. There was There's some remote areas, so these two did not do very well. But this was very encouraging and very intriguing. Next slide. Next slide, Aditi, please.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Rotary Club stopped the project after 3 years. And this is the problem with funded projects. They suddenly start, they suddenly end. Around 2015, I thought, why don't I do this myself through my trust? But we first surveyed 400 out of the 638 women to find out whether, as had happened in many other projects that I had funded through the Rotary Club, whether the work had stopped. And it was very encouraging to find that because the women had been convinced about the benefits, the 400 women that we interviewed, 90% of them had continued the organic kitchen gardens for nutrition. And they were having savings, they reported savings. The main reasons they said that they were continuing was they liked the idea of having fresh, toxin-free vegetables on their doorstep. They experienced good health and abundance. If visitors came, they did not have a problem. They had enough to share. Everyone in the household helped. And seed availability was the only requirement. Many of them had made arrangements for seeds, but this was their main constraint. So in 2016, the Sahayak Trust initiated the Anemia Free India Forum in Wardha. We started as Anemia Free Vidarbha Forum with 19 NGO partners. And our trust is the knowledge and training partner and coordinator of the AFIF program. Next. Next slide, please. The whole concept was to ensure that it was replicable and sustainable and not dependent on some funding. Our objective was to help people recover from nutritional deficiency anemia, which is one of the main anemia forms. And through kitchen gardens for nutrition developed by their own efforts and for primary consumption by the family. In order to be able to upscale, we decided to take a model of a network of implementing partners. We did an MOU, so everybody was clear what they could expect, because most of them thought that we will give them funding. But our trust does not take donations from anyone, does not give donations to anyone. So the MOU makes it clear what is it that we will do in terms of capacity building. The steps that were taken is first create awareness and commitment to the concept of nutrition and understand the risks of poor nutrition. Then the other components were that there should be diversity of plants. It's not a kitchen garden in our concept if there are 2 or 3 things grown over there. So we want them to grow 10, 12, 15 varieties of vegetable, and if they have the space, fruit trees. It must be grown organically, no sense having food and poison along with it. It must be firstly for family consumption, not for sale. The concept of sustainability was very important for us. We encouraged them to take payment from the beneficiary. There was a lot of NGO resistance mentally to begin with, but they realized that it was not a problem to get 50 rupees or 100 rupees for the seeds from the women. And where they can't get it, then they have a system that the NGO, if it can afford it, will give the seeds, and the beneficiary commits to return 3 times the amount of seeds. We wanted HP levels to be checked at regular intervals, baseline, and then preferably every 6 months or at least once a year. Unfortunately, NGOs have not been able to really do this. Only a few have been able to do it. We document and disseminate information regularly and have a meeting once a year of all the partners are invited. Next. Next slide. So this is how the program has grown from 2016, from the original 19, including two of them dropped out. We have now been able to reach all the districts of Maharashtra, about 6,600 villages, 4,000 schools were trained, 36 ashram shalas. And because of the lockdown, we shifted our focus from the school program to community program, self-help groups. We are a partner with MAVIN, the Maharashtra Arthik Vikas Mahamandal, where we are training in 7 districts. Their Sayoginis, who are coordinators for SHGs. Last year, we reached 23,000 households. We hope to do even much more this year because the number of partners has grown significantly. In the last 1 year, due to COVID and people becoming aware of the importance of immunity as a barrier to ill health, it has grown to 235 partners. So we are hoping that it will grow in terms of the number of kitchen gardens which are grown. Next.
2 more minutes, Dilnavaz ji.
Yeah. Change the slides rapidly now. Aditi.
Yeah, ma'am.
Just change.
I'm changing.
Next slide. It's not important. It's true. Next slide. Just keep changing the slides till I tell you to stop. This is material. Okay, stop here. We wanted to find out whether what is the impact of iron and folic acid, Ambari capsules, and organic kitchen garden. So we had a small study done through the organization called Ami Amcha Arogya Sathi, where they took 40 women from 6 villages each and gave them iron and folic acid tablets with deworming and without deworming. And as you will see, there was no forced feeding. They were all given an explanation of the importance of combating anemia and were given the tablets and the capsules and the kitchen garden knowledge. And you will see that there was a very significant improvement of 1.25 to 1.46 through the kitchen garden initiative. Whereas in the other cases, there was throwing away of capsules and so on. Okay, next. Next slide. We want to expand the kind of data collection that we are doing on this. Go to the next slide, please. Aditi. Change the slide, please.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm changing. Why not?
Okay, the recommendations were basically for dietary diversity. This is what we feel government could do. Create awareness, because we found that even where there was awareness, even if we did not give the training on kitchen garden, just the awareness on the importance of diet and nutrition, dietary diversity and nutrition, made a difference to the anemia. That's a different study which we are still getting it tabulated. The government should really see that there are low-cost open pollinated seed kits available, because Bayer, for instance, is jumping in with the seed kits, vegetable seed kits. We feel that NREGA funding, if it is used for this, it will make a big difference. The NGOs can be catalysts in this, working with panchayats. And we also now wish to move to proteins through backyard poultry and mushrooms. And are really training a cadre of NGO partners to be the capacity building partners in any of these programs. Next. Essentially, if we want this program to go, what we would really like is that it needs, we are going to expand into the 4 Hindi-speaking states now of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, as also Punjab. And the main thing is that we need to have NGO partners who are interested on the same wavelength as us. And there is the kind of benefits that are available are just not available through food fortification in terms of dietary diversity and all the things that have been spoken about earlier, plus social benefits. The whole community can come together if there's a community kitchen garden. And this can become embedded in the community, not something which is imposed from above. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dilnavaz ji. And before we open it up to questions, we have a final speaker with us today, and I'd like to invite her. It's Dr. Sylvia. She's a public health researcher and a doctor, and has been focusing on public health systems and different determinants of health, specifically caste and gender, how those two are influencing health and nutrition. So Sylvia, please join us and tell us what you have to say about food fortification.
Thank you, Ashleisha. Am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. I think there's a little paucity of time. So basically what I want to focus on is I think we need to also reiterate some of the key messages from this session till now. And one is that single nutrient deficiencies are rare, especially in a country like India, which has rampant malnutrition and several nutrient deficiencies. And also, like this iceberg, if you just look at one symptom or one clinical visible deficiency and you try and start treating for that, then you miss a lot of the other coexisting deficiencies which are likely to be there. Then this includes vitamins, minerals, fats and proteins. And again, fortification with just one or two nutrients is not a solution. Okay, and this I think was touched upon. This idea that deficiencies can be addressed by replacement of single nutrients, I think that has to be challenged at all fronts. For example, with hemoglobin, you need, apart from iron, a whole bunch of nutrients. You also need good quality proteins. So the idea of using tablets or single ingredient tablets or just fortification, it's not a scientific option. And like I said earlier, we have already multiple nutrient deficiencies. So we have the National Family Health Survey, we have the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, and I think it's very shocking if you look at the data, if you look at the prevalence of multiple deficiencies among children, and this CNNS was the first time it looked at adolescents. And I think we get a sense of how serious the crisis is in terms of nutrition in the country. And apart from that, there are also multiple factors that affect access to nutrition. So if this again is from the CNNS, and it shows how little children are consuming either vitamin A rich foods or iron rich foods, and the fact that nutrition is related to the age, the schooling of the mother, the wealth of the family, and we always have a lot of data saying that people who vegetarians are better nourished than non-vegetarians. But if you look at this kind of data, it's actually even those who actually by choice would like to eat meat are actually not able to eat. The consumption of animal foods is very, very small in India, and the food is not diverse enough, and many of the children don't have access to even a minimum acceptable diet. And again, these are some of the foods which we call nutrient dense foods. So basically, mixing these foods ensures that you get most of your proteins, most of your vitamins and minerals, although each of them may not have everything in the same quantity, but that is what, like within the food group of animal foods, again, diversity would be very useful. And the advantage of these nutrient-dense foods is that they are bioavailable. So whatever you eat is absorbed. Most of it is absorbed. You will not have things that prevent absorption like phytates and tannins and fiber, which actually even what is available in the food is not easily taken up by the body. It's also digestible, also culturally and traditionally eaten. and it can be a sustainable option because most of these can be grown in communities and locally. So you don't need you don't need companies for any of these foods. But again, we have certain barriers. I think it came across here and there, but I like to reiterate, since I have the privilege of being I have the privilege of being the last speaker. One is this idea of India as a vegetarian nation, and I think that has adversely affected everything. It has affected research and the policy making, the health education, and even I think medical education in the country. And it's a huge barrier. Again, this idea of purity versus pollution, the way certain foods are treated as impure or untouchable or polluted or inferior. I think those are huge barriers which we need to take cognizance of. Again, what is policy? I think we haven't reached a state of policy yet. We would just call them decision makers rather than policy makers, because the question we need to ask is, does science actually influence their decisions, or is it a whole bunch of other things like ideology, politics, border put your economics, corporate agenda? And going from the way things are, I would suspect that science is hardly foregrounded in any of these decision making. And to give an example, we have Akshaya Patra, which is basically from the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, which make no bones about their caste or religious prerogatives. They actually, if you look at some of their websites, they actually say that caste system is a good thing. Hierarchical systems are good. And then they have this whole understanding of sattvic versus tamasic food. They say, they're basically promoting a very homogeneous diet, devoid of things that people culturally eat. And again, this goes in the face of evidence. I think, at least in Karnataka, we've had multiple instances of the joint director of midday meals. We've had the food commission. We've had the many right to food groups raising it up. And I think, it was taken up with the National Institute of Nutrition also. But here again, it's a clear ideology wins, hands down over and above any science in the case of midday meals for children. We also have taboos around eggs, which is preventing eggs being given to children in midday meals for years. We have evidence to show that egg is a complete food. It can meet most of the nutritional requirements of the children. It's enjoyed by children. The days when eggs are provided in schools, the attendance is better. Almost 96% of the children are those who eat eggs at home. They're the ones who attend the government schools. And it has been consistently and denied in state after state in the country, and there's absolutely no scientific basis for it. In fact, in Karnataka, when we approached the the policymaker, I mean, again, not policymakers, the decision makers, they said the reason is religious. So again, when you have something like egg, which is being consistently denied to children, then we really need to ask questions. Why are these commonly eaten foods which people enjoy eating being denied? And then there's talk about things like fortification. And again, I think we all know the kind of criminalization of people who eat beef. It's become normal to say, oh, he was consuming beef or he was carrying beef, so it's okay to lynch him. And every other day we hear incidents of this. State after state is banning the consumption of beef. And the question we have to ask is, are these rational decisions based on nutrition or evidence, or are they based on something else? And again, there's a huge pandemic of conflict-laden research, and I think the other speakers have touched upon this. We have the Eat Lancet Commission, which is led by billionaires who are bringing in this whole corporate-led solutions to the world's nutrition problems. We need to really challenge that. And some of the solutions, I think, are available. We just need to look at them. One is to use science and nutrition rather than any other framework when we think of nutritional solutions. And now climate is coming in a big way. I think the arguments have to be separated. You can't use climate as an excuse to ask people to starve in a country like India. And again, if you're looking at it from an environmental perspective, fortification is not a solution. It neither allows diversity, nor food sovereignty, nor is it cost effective, because we heard about how premixes have to be flown in from other countries to India. It's not sustainable, and neither is it cultural. And I think supporting and modernizing local eaten animal food sources rather than take away what is already existing. Again, stop this obsessive focus on cereals and millets and exotic plants, remove cattle slaughter bans across the country, immediately introduce eggs in Anganwadis and the midday meal schemes, and subsidize animal source foods through all channels, like whether it's the Hopcoms or the public distribution systems or government outlets, and stop burdening.
1 more minute, Sylvia, 1 more minute to go.
Sure, I'm done. Stop burdening individuals and communities with climate change and saying you're responsible somehow. You're already starving, but maybe you can starve a little more in the interest of global climate change. I think that's extremely unethical, and all of us need to take a position on that. Again, reject billionaire corporate-led solutions. And I think making decisions at the policy level more inclusive, more representative, and break this whole caste and corporate nexus. So then after that we can talk about fortification. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Friends, we have now come to the end of all our presentations, and we have received many different questions. We don't have much time, but we have a few minutes. Some of our speakers have unfortunately already left. So there are some questions, for example, for Raja Sankar ji, but he's not here right now. I will share some of the questions and I request the speakers, also the panelists, but also people from the audience. We have many experts and many people involved in the field who are in the audience. And if you would like to answer a question, please raise your hand, or if you want to make a point also, please do raise your hand. I will say some of the questions that have come up. One of the questions is that iodine fortification of salt has already occurred for a long time. Has that succeeded or failed? And what's the difference then between iodine fortification and cereal fortification? Is it not the same thing? So I think this question could be taken by Veena ji. Another question is, can the concept of kitchen gardens be applied in urban settings? So another question, maybe Dilnavaz ji is interested in this. The question of the whole fortification process, is it coming only from the center, and do the states have the ability to say no to it? Finally, another question has come about rice fortification. Rice for kernels are basically added, fortified kernels are added to the rest of the rice. So if that rice is washed, then does that mean the food additives will be leached away? So will fortification be effective then? Because in India, there's a culture of washing rice. So these are just some of the questions. Someone has also asked about biofortification. What does that mean? Maybe Afsar can take that. So now I invite panelists and others, anybody who wants to respond to any of these questions, please raise your hand. Veena ji, are you there?
I'm there. I can talk about the iodine if you like.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I think I raised it, but maybe the person who raised the question wasn't there during my presentation. Iodine deficiency is known since 1920s or even earlier. And this is because the rainwater, which brings in iodine from the sea, doesn't really seep into the grounds because of deforestation, etc. And the runoff creates a soil which is depleted and there's no iodine in it. Children who don't get iodine during the growth phase, which iodine is very, very important, have goiter, which is a swelling around the neck, and mental deficiencies. And this is rampant in the hilly areas, the Himalayan range, and now in many parts of the country. In fact, you will find some coastal areas also with iodine deficiency. Now, the government did try to, now when 40% of children have these symptoms, you can't not address it if you are a responsible government. And children being mentally retarded is not something any mother would wish even on an enemy. So they tried fortifying salt with iodine, and that was the solution in Europe and many other countries. In fact, Europe got rid of its problem of iodine deficiency with this iodized salt. We were not able to see that iodine reached the Himalayan foothills or the peaks where people stayed because of our railways, our sluggish way in which we deliver public health care to remote corners. And it took us a few years, not quite a few years, to realize that unless we have universal fortification, people living in the Himalayan ranges are B-class citizens. Salt never reached there. And they couldn't wait for the salt. So salt used to get, they used to take salt across from Bengal and Bihar, etc., and smuggle it across. Though there was a law that non-iodized salt shall not be sold in Himalayan regions. But there was, they couldn't do without salt. They don't have a seashore and they had absolutely no way of getting it. So then this universal iodization was decided and it was implemented. We must all be happy that now instead of 40% of goiter, it's come down to less than 5%. It's less, it's no longer a public health problem. And it's true, some of us must consume that salt, but I think if we believe that the Northeast is part of this country, I think the rest of the country must agree to do what is good for the Northeast, and that is consume this salt. Of course, if you don't want this salt, iodine in your salt, just keep it open in sunlight for 24 hours and the iodine disappears. So what? Surely we can do this much for our brothers and sisters in the Northeast. And iodine is not stored in the body, so you have to eat it every day. The story of iron is very, very different. And iodine doesn't require too many other complex material to form the thyroxine, that is the hormone that is necessary. So the story is very different. The physiology is very different. Iron is a totally different thing. It is an element which doesn't get excreted easily. You have to shed your skin to get rid of the excess iron. It, as Dr. Kurpad told you, it just gets stored as a storage molecule called ferritin, which has other implications like chronic diseases. It will not form hemoglobin because it requires so many other nutrients. So if you're iron deficient, your hemoglobin will come up to a point till it hits the other deficiencies. And no person has only one nutrient deficiency. If you're not eating enough food, if you're eating only rice and rice, as Vandana said, rice and rice and rice, you've got multiple deficiencies. So you'll hit the next deficiency very soon. So your hemoglobin may come up from 7 to 8.5 or 9, but then you don't have quality protein, you don't have zinc, you don't have magnesium, you don't have copper, you don't have B12, folic acid, etc. So it's like whatever would I say? You are actually inflicting iron onto a whole nation, medicalizing the solution, and the whole nation is medicalized because you don't know how to handle anemia. And I think medical doctors and others know how to handle anemia. And iron is only one of the solutions. There are many, many others. If you are below 7, etc., you need blood transfusion. After that, you might need injections. And after that, you might need tablets. So what is this drama about fortification? I don't think any medical doctor respects this as a solution. Nor do public health people who know the side effects of iron. It can change the microbiome of the intestines. It can cause ferritin storage, cause chronic diseases, and the cost to the nation. And also it can make malaria endemic areas worse, tuberculosis worse. Anyone with acute infections must be careful about iron. With so much medical knowledge, it seems to be that the corporates have taken over the whole area of public health. And that is what is disgusting and unacceptable. It is like it's a lazy person's solution to a problem which is as serious as anemia. And it's women who really pay a huge price, because they are the ones who bleed every month and then give birth to children and have anemia which during these phases of their life. It is a lazy person's solution, and it's no solution at all. I hope I've explained.
Thanks so much, Veena ji. And next, I want to invite Dwiji. There are some questions around processing. For example, one question is, why is the cost of refined oil lesser than unrefined? So are they taking out any valuable content during refining? And also some other questions and Dwiji also wanted to make some points around food processing. So Dwiji, why don't you come in now? Dwiji, are you there? Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't unmute myself. So yeah, thank you, Ashleisha. And I just want to take off from what Dr. Shatrugna was mentioning. Actually, I know that she doesn't think so, but it's not just a lazy man's perspective, Doctor. It's also a very commercially motivated perspective or approach. Because one of the things that we have to recognize is that these are all, like a lot of the other speakers have already presented, these are all technologically driven solutions. And technology invariably has been developed by those with money and those who can influence policy. So even when it's developed by the government, these technologies are all driven to further commercial interests, and that we have to recognize. Wherever there are new technologies being brought into a large-scale operation, you can be sure that it's the commercial interest that's driving it. I'm not trying to say that everything commercial is wrong. Well, in most cases it is, but it's only as an exception that technology is coming to the better, for a better outcome. So I don't think it's just about a lazy approach. It's also a very motivated approach, which is driven by the money interests or capital interests of a few. The other thing that I would like to mention, which Raja and Debal both underline, is that there is a lot of processing that happens, which is essentially for a visual appeal. But it's not just for a visual appeal, but one of the primary factors is the visual appeal. Case in point is the rice that Debal Deb was talking about. Until about 1990s, even in the early 2000s, we had to clean our rice at home before we used it, whether we got it from the PDS or we got it from a shop. Of course, in the shop, if you paid a little bit more, you could get the cleaned varieties. So the reason for that was that the brand was still retained on that rice, and machines could not distinguish between a rice and something that is not rice. And therefore, when technology, again, technology solutions, when technology came in that would allow them to sort them, they recognized that they can get better efficiency, another one of those keywords that should set off alarm bells. Another way, they found out that it could be more efficient when they removed the bran layer. Now, the bran layer is where most of the mineral content is. So all those things that they want to fortify for, not all, but many of the things that they are seeking to fortify for are actually in that bran layer. So it's not just about shifting to or including traditional varieties of paddy or millets or oils in their more natural form, but rather investing in technologies that will spur a big economic shift in, or boost our economy. But then it would not be to the advantage of those who are already in positions of power or big industries. It would be to the advantage of small industries. So while they talk about Make in India and all that, like some of our friends shared earlier, the entire benefits, commercial benefits, monetary benefits of these mandatory fortification is very much to serve the current, hegemonies and capital interests. So those were the 2 points that I just wanted to make. And just to answer this question that Ashleisha mentioned, so when the bran is taken out, what you allow for is a secondary revenue stream in the rice bran oil. So you might have come across rice bran oil. If you haven't, just go check it out online. It's basically oil that is extracted from the bran of the rice grains. So yeah, I mean, it's again commercial interest that drove that idea, and it continues, whether it is in terms of paddy, whether it is in terms of oils, pulses, a whole bunch of things. The more the process you do, the more you're able to monetize your product streams, and therefore make it less risky, more stable, earn more, etc., etc. Thank you.
Ashleisha, I have just one point to add. Half a second, may I?
Go ahead, go ahead.
For those who are interested, in the 1947-48, after the war and around independence, the government of India issued orders to stop polishing rice for the whole nation, because there was so much B complex deficiency, and we had epidemic, we had a whole range of symptoms showing up the need for B complex vitamin. The government actually issued a notification. I can find that thing and share it with the whole group. So it is possible for the government to have a task force to decide on how much polishing. Actually, more and more rice is, the polishing is now not 2, 3, 4 times. There's a gradation, and they remove as much as possible because they can get rice bran oil. That is also a fact. So you're getting more and more pearly rice and less nutrients in it. But this notification was issued in 1940s, late 40s. Remember, after the famine, India was in a very bad shape.
Thanks, Veena ji. Is Afsar there with us right now?
Yes, Ashleisha.
Afsar, did you address somebody as questions have come up about biofortification and what that is? Would you be able to quickly respond to that before we close up?
I think fortification and the biofortification both are quite different. And fortification is basically after production or harvesting, when vitamin D or A or zinc are added during the processing. Biofortification is basically before the production. It's during the plant breeding. So that is why what Debal Deb presented about golden rice is an example of the biofortified rice. It's basically so that is the difference. I mean, it's before production, and biofortification is generally genetically engineered. Biofortified products are generally genetically engineered.
Thanks for that, Afsar. So yeah, thanks for pointing out there are actually two very different processes, and here we are focusing mainly on the fortification, which is the processing part, and not on the crop stage.
But just, just one more thing. In fact, all those companies who are doing especially the international ones like Harvest Plus and Gain, they are also heavily into biofortification. In fact, Harvest Plus is promoting biofortified, products. So this fortification is the first stage. Biofortification could be the next stage, and we probably may have biofortified rice like golden rice. It has already been commercially introduced recently in July in Philippines.
Okay, so that's probably another threat that we are seeing, and they are all kind of part of the same package in the sense that these are corporate controlled technologies, and once again going far away from the community kind of solutions that we are trying to emphasize here. For the final point, I would like to invite Dilnavaz ji. There were some questions about urban gardening, and can that also help urban poor, for example, in kitchen gardens in an urban setting? Dilnavaz ji?
We have focused primarily on the rural area because land was is easily available there. But recently we have worked with these three Mukti Sangatna, which is a rag pickers association. We have given training to their people. They do composting in the societies, and from the compost, they are growing kitchen gardens now on the terraces and being able to take the produce from it. This is a solution which is one solution. The second is for individuals. If they are in smaller urban areas, they will have terraces. They may have some common area if there's 2 or 3 houses together. We recommend vertical kitchen gardens for urban areas. I myself have put up one, but now I'm going to look at a model where in just 2 feet width, you can plant a large number of leafy vegetables. The third thing is microgreens. They are very high on the nutrient value compared to the full-grown plant for equivalent weight. And they can be harvested in a very few days, added into salads, added on top of other food, put into parathas, as long as you don't have too much cooking. The other thing that we are working on is a whole series of nutritionally enhanced recipes. Now, these would be useful for anybody in rural or urban settings. We'll be having a large number of modules, which we'll be making on this. So these are some of the things that would be available for urban people.
Thanks, Dilnavaz ji. So friends, we've had a very interesting discussion, and we are actually coming to the end of our allotted time. So many of you joined us for so long and stayed till the end. That's really a great kind of indication that this is an issue that is of interest to so many. There were also some comments that why are there no pro-fortification speakers? So friends, and that this is a non-inclusive platform. That was not our intention. The problem that we see is that fortification is actually getting a lot more attention in policy, and there are so many more spaces which are uncritically promoting mandatory fortification. So we also need some space to discuss the issues with that. And also want the policy to be much more inclusive and not only focus on mandatory fortification. So friends, there are some next steps. We are going to share all the presentations. You can see the presentation on the ASHA Facebook website, on the YouTube. We will also share a summary of the key points. We also have an email group. And if any of you want to join that group, you can email us at asha.kisanswaraj@gmail.com, asha.kisanswaraj@gmail.com, or send us a message on Facebook. If you would like to join our email group and you want to be part of these conversations, if you want to be part of any other events that we might be planning, it would be wonderful. If any of you are interested to have local events and you need support with that, also we invite you to be in touch with us. And once again, thank you so much to the organizers, to all the volunteers who helped us, and our excellent panelists, and for these great questions. So with that, I say thank you, and we close this webinar now. Thanks.